The warp defies mortal understanding by its very nature. It exists as a roiling ocean of psychic energy, a dimension where thought and reality merge into an endless storm of emotion and power. Within this realm of madness, demons come into being not as creatures born or made, but as fragments of consciousness split from the vast, incomprehensible entities known as the Chaos Gods. These beings, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, are themselves amalgamations of mortal emotion given sentience and terrible purpose. Every demon, from the mightiest greater demon to the lowliest lesser entity, represents a sliver of their patron god's psyche made manifest, shaped by the same emotions that feed their divine progenitor. Lesser demons form from concentrated streams of specific emotions that flow through the warp. A bloodletter of Khorne coalesces where rage and violence reach critical mass, drawing upon the anger of 1,000,000 battlefields across the galaxy. Horrors of Tzeentch emerge from the currents of ambition, scheming, and the hunger for forbidden knowledge. Plaguebearers shamble into existence where despair and acceptance of decay create eddies in the immaterium. Daemonettes of Slaanesh crystallize from excess, obsession, and the pursuit of sensation beyond all reason. Each lesser demon carries within it a fragment of its god's consciousness, but only a fragment. They possess awareness and cunning, yet lack the vast intellect and power of their greater kin. The composition of these entities remains fundamentally alien to material existence. A lesser demon possesses no true flesh, no organs, no biological processes that sustain life as mortals understand it. Instead, they exist as coherent patterns of warp energy held together by the will of their patron deity and the emotions that birthed them. When a bloodletter appears to possess muscle and sinew, what observers witness is warp energy structured to mirror the concept of a warrior's physique. The brass collar around its neck, the hellblade clutched in its clawed hand, these two are manifestations of concept rather than matter. The blade cuts not because it possesses a sharp edge in any physical sense, but because it embodies the idea of violence and bloodshed so completely that reality itself accepts the wound. Within the hierarchical structure of the demonic legions, lesser demons occupy the foundational tier. They serve as the infantry of the Dark God's armies, the workforce that carries out the will of their superiors, and the expendable masses thrown against the Materium's defenders. Above them stand the greater demons, bloodthirsters, lords of change, great unclean ones, and keepers of secrets, entities of such power that each commands legions of their lesser brethren. Between these extremes exist demon princes, those mortals who earned apotheosis through service to the ruinous powers, and various specialized demon entities that fulfill specific roles within their god's domain. The relationship between lesser demons and their greater counterparts mirrors the military hierarchies of mortal armies, yet operates through mechanisms entirely divorced from conventional command structures. A bloodthirster does not issue orders through speech or written command. Instead, its will radiates through the warp, and the bloodletters under its dominion feel compelled to obey through the same connection that binds them to Khorne himself. Resistance to such commands remains theoretically possible, but lesser demons lack the individual strength of will to defy a greater demon's imperatives. They exist as extensions of their god's purpose, and that purpose flows down through the hierarchy, with the inevitability of water seeking lower ground. Lesser demons fulfill countless roles beyond simple combat. Pink horrors serve as spellcasters and manipulators of reality's fabric, their unstable forms constantly shifting as they channel Tzeentchian sorcery. Plaguebearers act as record keepers for Nurgle's garden, tallying every disease, every victim, every blessed infection with meticulous precision, even as their rotting forms shamble through the muck. Daemonettes perform the dark rituals and ceremonies that please Slaanesh, crafting experiences of such refined sensation that mortal minds shatter from mere proximity. Bloodletters exist purely for war, their entire being focused on the act of killing in their god's name. The manifestation of lesser demons into real space requires specific conditions that bridge the barrier between the warp and material reality. This barrier, often called the veil, exists as a fundamental property of the universe itself, a metaphysical membrane that separates the ordered laws of physics from the chaotic energies of the immaterium. Under normal circumstances, this barrier remains impenetrable to demonic entities. They can observe real space through it, sensing the emotions that feed them like sharks detecting blood in water, but cannot cross without assistance. Warp rifts provide the most direct route for demonic incursion. These tiers in reality occur where the veil grows thin or ruptures entirely, creating a direct channel between dimensions. Such rifts emerge in regions of intense psychic activity, around unstable warp drives, or in locations where the barrier has been deliberately weakened through ritual and sacrifice. The Eye of Terror stands as the most prominent example of a permanent warp rift, a vast region where the warp and real space overlap so completely that demons walk freely without need for sustaining energy. Smaller rifts appear and collapse constantly throughout the galaxy, some lasting mere seconds while others persist for years. Psykers represent another avenue for demonic manifestation. Every human with psychic potential serves as a potential doorway to the warp, their souls burning like beacons in the immaterium. Untrained or weak-willed psykers prove especially vulnerable to possession, their bodies becoming vessels for demonic entities seeking entry to real space. A possessed human provides a lesser demon with a stable anchor in the material universe, though the mortal form typically degrades rapidly under the strain of containing warp energy. More powerful psykers can resist such intrusions, but even the strongest occasionally fall when confronted by entities of sufficient power or cunning. Ritual summoning allows mortals to deliberately invite demons into real space under controlled conditions. These ceremonies require extensive preparation, precise execution, and usually significant sacrifice. Blood must be spilled to weaken the veil, symbols of power inscribed to create a receptive space, and the summoners will focus to call forth specific entities. Chaos cults across the galaxy perform such rituals constantly, trading their souls and the souls of others for demonic aid. The demons that answer these summons arrive bound by the ritual's parameters, compelled to serve the summoner's purpose before returning to the warp. However, the binding proves only as strong as the summoner's will and knowledge. Errors in the ritual frequently result in the demon breaking free and slaughtering everyone present. Once manifested in real space, lesser demons face immediate challenges that greater demons weather with far more resilience. The fundamental incompatibility between warp energy and physical law creates constant strain on their existence. A bloodletter standing on solid ground expends energy simply maintaining its coherent form against reality's insistence that such creatures cannot exist. This expenditure increases with every action taken, every wound inflicted, every moment spent in the material dimension. Without a constant supply of appropriate emotional energy to sustain them, lesser demons begin to destabilize within hours or days. The emotions that feed lesser demons must match their nature. Bloodletters draw strength from violence and rage occurring in their immediate vicinity. A battlefield provides ideal sustaining energy, each death an act of fury feeding the demon's presence. Remove a bloodletter from combat, place it in an environment of peace and tranquility, and it rapidly weakens. Daemonettes require sensation and excess, the presence of mortals experiencing intense pleasure, pain, or obsession. Plaguebearers feed on despair and acceptance of mortality, growing stronger where hope dies. Pink horrors thrive on change, ambition, and the casting of sorcery. Physical damage affects lesser demons differently than mortal creatures. A bloodletter struck by a bolter round does not bleed in any conventional sense. Instead, the impact disrupts the warp energy maintaining its form, creating a wound that appears as a tear in reality rather than damaged flesh. Sufficient damage causes the demon's manifestation to collapse entirely, its essence snapping back to the warp like a severed cord. This death proves temporary. The demon continues to exist within the immaterium, though it may take decades or centuries before it can manifest again depending on the severity of the disruption. Certain weapons and materials prove particularly effective against demonic entities. Sanctified weapons blessed by the imperial cult or wielded by those of pure faith cut through demonic essence more readily than mundane arms. Psychic attacks strike directly at the warp energy comprising a demon's form, making psykers valuable assets in demonic combat despite the risks they pose. Null fields and pariahs, those rare individuals born without souls, create zones of reality so absolute that demons cannot maintain coherent form in their presence. The Sisters of Silence weaponized this effect during the Great Crusade, their very existence anathema to creatures of the warp. The instability of lesser demons in real space creates tactical limitations that shape how they wage war. Extended campaigns prove difficult without constant sources of sustaining emotion or permanent warp rifts to anchor their presence. Lesser demons excel at sudden strikes, overwhelming violence, and operations of limited duration. They surge through breaches in reality, slaughter everything in reach, and withdraw before the strain of manifestation becomes unsustainable. Prolonged sieges or defensive operations require either a permanent warp rift, continuous ritual sacrifice to maintain their presence, or possessed mortals who provide stable anchors in real space. The dependence on warp energy also makes lesser demons vulnerable to strategic manipulation. Defenders who recognize a demonic incursion can sometimes survive by denying the entities the emotions they require. Disciplined troops maintaining emotional control, refusing to give in to rage or despair, effectively starve Khornate or Nurglite demons of sustaining energy. This approach requires exceptional training and willpower. Few mortal soldiers can maintain such discipline while facing the literal embodiments of their worst fears and darkest emotions. The Bloodletter stands as the most numerous and recognizable of Khorne's demonic servants, a creature whose entire existence revolves around a single purpose: to kill in the name of the Blood God. Where other lesser demons might possess secondary functions or exhibit varied behaviors, the Bloodletter knows only war. Its form reflects this absolute dedication to violence, every aspect of its physical manifestation designed to inflict death upon Khorne's enemies. A Bloodletter's appearance strikes observers with immediate, visceral horror. Its skin burns with a deep crimson hue that seems to pulse with inner heat, as though the creature's very flesh smolders with barely contained rage. This coloration varies slightly between individual demons, ranging from bright scarlet to darker, almost burgundy tones, but always maintains that characteristic red associated with spilled blood. The skin itself appears leathery and tough, stretched tight over a frame of corded muscle that suggests tremendous physical strength. These muscles do not simply appear powerful, they constantly shift and flex beneath the skin, giving the impression of a body perpetually tensed for violence. The Bloodletter's build follows a distinctly humanoid pattern, standing roughly the height of a tall human male, though its proportions skew toward the bestial. Its legs bend backward at the knee like those of a goat or other ungulate, ending in cloven hooves that leave scorched imprints on whatever surface they touch. These hooves clatter against stone and metal, with a sound that experienced Imperial guardsmen learned to recognize and fear. The arms extend slightly longer than human proportions would suggest, ending in hands tipped with black claws, capable of rending flesh and armor with equal ease. Each finger terminates in a talon designed for gripping weapons and tearing apart those unfortunate enough to be caught without one. The skull of a Bloodletter presents perhaps its most distinctive feature. The head sits atop a thick neck, the face dominated by a fanged maw that stretches impossibly wide when the demon roars its battle cry. The teeth within that maw appear as jagged, yellowed daggers, stained with the essence of countless victims. Above this terrible mouth, the skull extends backward and upward, crowned by a pair of horns that curve from the temples. These horns vary in size and shape between individual Bloodletters, some sporting straight spikes while others display elaborate curved protrusions. A brass collar encircles every Bloodletter's neck, inscribed with runes of Khorne that burn with eldritch power. This collar serves both as a mark of the demon's servitude and as a focus for the warp energy that sustains its manifestation. The eyes of a Bloodletter glow with a baleful yellow or red light, devoid of pupils or any recognizable structure. These orbs track movement with predatory focus, fixing upon targets with an intensity that many soldiers report as physically uncomfortable. The gaze of a Bloodletter carries weight, a psychic pressure that communicates the demon's singular desire to close distance and begin killing. Veterans who survive encounters with these demons often describe the moment of eye contact as the point where they truly understood they faced something fundamentally inhuman, something that viewed them not as a person, but as meat to be harvested for Khorne's glory. Every Bloodletter wields a Hellblade, a weapon forged in the brass foundries of Khorne's domain within the warp. These swords defy conventional metallurgy, appearing as broad-bladed instruments of execution that glow with internal heat. The metal shifts between brass and a darker blood-red hue depending on the angle of observation, and the edge never dulls regardless of how much it cuts. A hellblade does not simply slice through armor and flesh, it burns as it cuts, the wound cauterizing even as it opens. The psychic resonance of these weapons disrupts the target's connection to reality itself, making injuries inflicted by hellblades exceptionally difficult to heal, even with advanced Imperial medical technology. The forging process for hellblades occurs in Khorne's realm, where demonic smiths pound warp stuff into shape upon anvils of brass. Each blade emerges as an individual creation, slightly different from its fellows in length, weight, and the specific runes etched along its surface. Despite these variations, all hellblades share certain characteristics. They weigh nothing to their demonic wielders while feeling impossibly heavy to anyone else who attempts to lift them. They never break or chip, and they hunger for blood with an almost sentient awareness. A bloodletter separated from its hellblade will fight with claws and teeth, but it seeks to reclaim or acquire a blade at the earliest opportunity, as the weapon represents both its primary tool and a symbol of its purpose. The combat doctrine of bloodletters emphasizes relentless forward momentum and overwhelming aggression. These demons do not maneuver tactically in the conventional sense, do not seek cover, and show no interest in self-preservation. From the moment of manifestation, a bloodletter charges toward the nearest enemy with single-minded determination. This behavior stems from their fundamental nature as fragments of Khorne's psyche. The blood god cares nothing for defense or cunning tactics, only for the act of killing and the flow of blood. His demons reflect this philosophy absolutely. When bloodletters attack in groups, they exhibit a form of pack hunting that resembles the behavior of predatory animals more than trained soldiers. They move together instinctively, surrounding targets and attacking from multiple angles without need for verbal communication or obvious signals. This coordination emerges from their shared connection to Khorne, each demon sensing the positions and intentions of its packmates through the same psychic link that binds them to their god. A squad of bloodletters can execute complex flanking maneuvers and coordinated strikes despite never speaking or acknowledging each other's presence beyond the occasional roar of bloodlust. The complete disregard for self-preservation that defines bloodletter behavior creates tactical challenges for defenders. Standard suppression tactics prove useless against demons that neither fear death nor feel pain in any meaningful sense. A bloodletter struck by lasgun fire continues its charge, ignoring wounds that would drop a human soldier. Even catastrophic damage fails to slow these creatures until their manifestation collapses entirely. Imperial Guard doctrine emphasizes concentrated firepower and the creation of overlapping fields of fire specifically to counter this relentless advance, as the only reliable way to stop a bloodletter charge involves destroying enough of the demons that the survivors lack the numbers to reach defensive positions. Bloodletters organize into cohorts that follow a hierarchy dictated by age, power, and favor in Khorne's eyes. The basic unit consists of 8 bloodletters, a number sacred to Khorne that appears repeatedly throughout his demonic legions. These 8 demon squads function as the smallest independent tactical element, capable of operating alone or combining with other squads to form larger formations. Multiple squads gather into larger cohorts that can number in the dozens or hundreds, though the exact size varies based on available warp energy and the strength of the breach through which they manifest. Individual bloodletters within these formations display minimal variation in capability or behavior. Unlike mortal armies, where soldiers develop distinct personalities and skill levels, bloodletters emerge from the warp as near identical copies of an archetypal concept. The demon that manifested yesterday possesses essentially the same capabilities as one that has existed for millennia, because both represent the same fragment of Khorne's consciousness given form. Experience does not improve a bloodletter's combat effectiveness in any conventional sense, though demons that survive multiple manifestations do accumulate a sort of crystallized awareness that makes them marginally more dangerous. Command of Bloodletter cohorts falls to Heralds of Khorne, more powerful demonic entities that serve as officers and champions within the Blood God's armies. These heralds possess greater strength and resilience than common bloodletters, standing taller and wielding larger, more elaborate hellblades. A herald's presence amplifies the aggression and combat effectiveness of nearby bloodletters through its stronger connection to Khorne, essentially broadcasting the Blood God's will with greater intensity. Where a herald leads, bloodletters fight with even more ferocious determination, their attacks landing with greater force and their charges striking home with devastating impact. Skullmaster champions represent an elite variant of herald that rides upon juggernauts, demonic beasts of brass and muscle that serve as Khorne's cavalry. These mounted commanders lead breakthrough assaults and pursuit operations, their greater mobility allowing them to direct bloodletter cohorts across wider battlefields. A Skullmaster charges at the head of its formation, the juggernaut's momentum adding devastating force to the initial impact. The sight of a Skullmaster bearing down upon defensive positions has broken the morale of countless Imperial Guard regiments, the combination of speed, size, and obvious power proving too much for mortal courage to withstand. The organizational structure of Bloodletter forces remains fluid despite these command elements. Heralds and Skullmasters do not issue orders in any formal sense, nor do they coordinate complex battle plans. Instead, they serve as focal points for Khorne's will, their presence shaping the behavior of lesser demons through psychic influence rather than tactical direction. A herald might instinctively lead its cohort toward the strongest enemy concentration simply because that's where the most blood will flow, and the bloodletters follow because their nature compels them toward the same objective. This system functions with surprising effectiveness precisely because it requires no communication or planning. Every demon involved wants the same thing and pursues it with absolute commitment. Throughout Imperial history, Bloodletter manifestations have marked some of the most catastrophic battles and darkest defeats humanity has suffered. The First War for Armageddon stands as perhaps the most infamous example, when the forces of chaos broke through into real space on a scale rarely witnessed. Bloodletter cohorts numbered in the tens of thousands, surging across the Hive world's surface in a tide of crimson fury. They butchered entire regiments of Imperial Guard, their hellblades cutting through defensive lines that had held against conventional enemies for weeks. The Space Wolves chapter responded to the crisis, their Grey Hunters and Bloodclaws engaging the demonic hordes in brutal close combat, while the newly revealed Grey Knights struck at the greater demons, commanding the invasion. The Bloodletters fought with characteristic ferocity, giving no quarter and accepting no surrender, until the combined might of the Space Marines and the sacrifice of countless guardsmen finally drove them back into the warp. The various Black Crusades launched from the Eye of Terror have regularly featured Bloodletter cohorts as shock troops and breakthrough elements. During the 13th Black Crusade, Bloodletters manifested across dozens of worlds in the Cadian Gate, their attacks coordinated with the advances of Chaos Space Marine warbands. On Kasser Haln, a full cohort of 300 Bloodletters materialized within the fortress city's inner sanctum after cultists completed a summoning ritual using the blood of captured defenders. The demons carved through the garrison in less than an hour, their hellblades opening the gates for the traitor forces besieging the walls. Similar manifestations occurred throughout the sector, each one creating a breach that conventional forces exploited. The Daemonettes of Slaanesh embody a paradox that mortal minds struggle to process. These demons manifest as the physical expression of the Dark Prince's domain over excess, sensation, and the pursuit of perfection beyond reason. Where Bloodletters present straightforward horror through their obvious monstrousness, Daemonettes weaponize beauty itself, twisting it into something that simultaneously attracts and repels. Their appearance operates on a level that bypasses rational thought, triggering responses in the observer that range from fascination to revulsion, often both at once. The basic form of a Daemonette follows a humanoid structure, standing roughly the height of a human woman with proportions that suggest grace and agility. The skin appears smooth and pale, ranging from ivory white to subtle pastel hues of pink, purple, or blue depending on the individual demon. This skin possesses an almost luminescent quality, as though lit from within by some internal radiance. At first glance, the overall silhouette might read as feminine and attractive, with flowing movements and an elegant bearing that draws the eye. This initial impression represents the trap, the lure that Slaanesh uses to snare the unwary. Closer examination reveals the alien wrongness that permeates every aspect of a Daemonette's physical form. The limbs extend too long for human proportions, the joints bending at angles that suggest a flexibility no natural skeleton could support. The hands terminate not in fingers, but in crab-like claws, chitinous pincers capable of snapping through armor and bone with equal ease. These claws appear polished and sharp, gleaming like lacquered talons, and they move with a delicate precision that makes their lethality even more disturbing. A Daemonette can use these claws to perform intricate gestures as easily as it can disembowel a victim, the same appendage serving as both instrument of artistry and weapon of war. The head of a Daemonette features a face that shifts between beauty and horror depending on angle and lighting. High cheekbones and a delicate jaw structure suggest classical attractiveness, but the mouth opens too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. The eyes lack pupils, appearing instead as pools of solid color, violet, pink, or black, that reflect light with an oily sheen. These eyes track movement with predatory awareness, studying observers with an intensity that many survivors describe as violating. Hair grows from the skull in long, flowing locks that move as though underwater, defying gravity and air currents in ways that mark the demon's fundamentally unnatural existence. Many Daemonettes display additional features that emphasize their alien nature. Some possess a single breast while remaining flat on the other side, an asymmetry that draws attention to the wrongness of their form. Others exhibit horns growing from their temples or foreheads, curved and elegant but undeniably inhuman. The number of arms varies between individuals, with some Daemonettes manifesting 4 or even 6 limbs, each ending in those characteristic claws. These additional appendages do not appear as mutations or deformities, but rather as natural extensions of the demon's form, moving with the same fluid grace as the primary pair. The voice of a Daemonette carries a musical quality that bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to the emotional centers of the brain. When these demons speak, their words arrive as whispers and promises, suggestions of pleasure and fulfillment that seem tailored specifically to the listener's deepest desires. This effect operates as a psychic phenomenon rather than simple auditory manipulation. The demon's voice resonates through the warp, touching the soul of anyone who hears it. Experienced soldiers train themselves to recognize this sensation and resist it, but even veterans occasionally falter when confronted with promises that address their most carefully hidden wants. The movement of Daemonettes represents perhaps their most unsettling characteristic. They do not walk so much as glide, their feet barely touching the ground as they advance. Combat footage recovered from battlefields shows these demons flowing around obstacles with liquid grace, their bodies bending and twisting in ways that suggest bonelessness. This unnatural agility serves both aesthetic and practical purposes. The hypnotic quality of their movements can entrance observers, freezing them in place as the demon closes distance, while the same flexibility makes Daemonettes exceptionally difficult targets for ranged weapons. Daemonettes employ psychological warfare as instinctively as Bloodletters employ violence. Where Khorne's demons simply charge and kill, Slaanesh's handmaidens manipulate, seduce, and corrupt. They speak to their victims during combat, offering promises of pleasure and release from pain. These offers carry genuine psychic weight, creating phantom sensations in the target's mind, the ghost of a caress, the suggestion of ecstasy, the promise that surrender will bring rewards beyond imagination. Soldiers facing Daemonettes must fight not only the physical threat, but also the insidious whispers that erode discipline and will. The exploitation of desire forms the core of Daemonette psychological tactics. These demons possess an instinctive understanding of mortal wants, reading the psychic emanations of nearby souls like open books. A guardsman who joined the imperial military to escape poverty might hear promises of wealth and luxury. A tech priest obsessed with understanding ancient machinery receives whispers about forbidden knowledge and perfect comprehension. An officer burdened by command decisions faces offers of freedom from responsibility and judgment. The Daemonette tailors its approach to each victim, probing for weaknesses and exploiting them with surgical precision. This psychological assault extends beyond individual targets to affect entire units. The presence of Daemonettes on a battlefield creates an atmosphere of wrongness that erodes morale through cumulative exposure. Soldiers report feeling watched, experiencing inappropriate thoughts during combat, or finding their attention drawn away from tactical necessities toward the demons themselves. Commissars and officers must maintain constant vigilance not only against external threats, but also against the internal corruption that Daemonettes spread simply through their presence. Entire squads have turned on their comrades after prolonged exposure to these demons, their minds twisted by promises and sensations, until they no longer recognize friend from foe. In direct combat, Daemonettes function as swift assault troops specializing in close-quarters engagement. Their claws serve as their primary weapons, each pincer capable of punching through flak armor, and even the ceramite plate worn by space marines if the demon strikes at weak points in the armor's coverage. The claws do not simply cut, they pierce and tear, creating wounds that bleed profusely and resist medical treatment. Veterans who survive encounters with Daemonettes often carry scars that never fully heal, the injuries marked by a persistent sensitivity that serves as a permanent reminder of their brush with Slaanesh's servants. The speed at which Daemonettes move in combat exceeds human capability by a significant margin. They dart between targets with blurring velocity, their claws lashing out in strikes too fast for the eye to follow. This preternatural speed combines with their flexibility to make them exceptionally dangerous in melee range. A Daemonette can contort its body to avoid incoming blows while simultaneously striking from unexpected angles, its multiple limbs attacking independently to overwhelm a defender's ability to parry or block. Space Marines trained in close combat techniques find themselves challenged by opponents who seem to predict their movements and exploit openings before they fully form. Daemonettes organize into packs called Seekers when mounted upon steeds of Slaanesh demonic beasts that resemble reptilian horses with unnaturally long tongues. These mounted formations serve as fast attack elements, racing across battlefields to strike at vulnerable targets or pursue fleeing enemies. The combination of the steed's speed and the Daemonette's combat prowess creates a devastating cavalry force capable of running down infantry and light vehicles with equal efficiency. Seeker packs often operate independently of larger formations, ranging ahead to scout and harass before the main demonic force engages. The connection between Daemonettes and mortal excess manifests in their attraction to specific types of psychic emanations. These demons gravitate toward locations and individuals engaged in hedonistic pursuits, drawn by the emotional energy generated through sensation-seeking behavior. A noble's palace hosting an elaborate feast might attract Daemonettes if the celebration crosses from mere enjoyment into true excess. An artist working themselves to exhaustion in pursuit of the perfect piece creates ripples in the warp that Slaanesh's handmaidens sense and investigate. A warrior who fights not for duty or survival, but for the pure sensation of combat radiates the kind of energy that calls to these demons. The pursuit of perfection represents a particularly potent lure for Daemonettes. Mortals who become obsessed with achieving flawless execution in any field, combat, art, craftsmanship, scholarship, generate the specific emotional resonance that Slaanesh finds most appealing. The demon does not distinguish between pursuits that Imperial society considers noble and those it deems depraved. A space marine seeking perfect martial technique attracts Daemonettes just as surely as a debauched pleasure cultist, because both pursue their goals with an intensity that transcends reason. This makes Slaanesh particularly dangerous among the Chaos gods, as the path to corruption can begin with seemingly virtuous dedication. Artistic obsession creates especially strong connections to Daemonettes. Across the Imperium, countless artists, musicians, and performers have fallen to Slaanesh through their desperate need to create something transcendent. A composer who hears whispers of impossible harmonies, a painter who sees colors that should not exist, a sculptor who receives visions of forms beyond mortal comprehension. All of these represent potential entry points for demonic corruption. Daemonettes often appear to such individuals first as muses, offering inspiration and insight that elevates their work to new heights. The artist becomes dependent on these visits, craving the creative ecstasy they bring, until the line between inspiration and possession blurs beyond recognition. The physical manifestation of Daemonettes in real space follows the same general principles that govern all lesser demons, but with specific conditions that reflect Slaanesh's nature. These demons emerge most readily in locations where the veil has been weakened through acts of extreme sensation or the pursuit of pleasure beyond normal bounds. Pleasure cults conducting their rituals create ideal conditions for Daemonette manifestation, the combined psychic energy of participants thinning reality until the demons can slip through. Unlike Bloodletters, which require violence and rage to sustain their presence, Daemonettes feed on a broader spectrum of sensations. Pleasure and pain prove equally nourishing, as do the complex emotions associated with artistic creation and the pursuit of perfection. The sustaining energy that maintains a Daemonette's manifestation need not come from obviously corrupt sources. A battlefield where soldiers experience the rush of combat, the terror of facing death, and the relief of survival creates emotional turbulence that Daemonettes can feed upon. A hospital where patients suffer intense pain while doctors experience the satisfaction of successful treatment generates the kind of mixed sensations that appeal to Slaanesh's nature. Even a competitive sporting event, if the participants push themselves to extremes and the crowd's emotional investment reaches sufficient intensity, can provide trace amounts of sustaining energy. This makes Daemonettes more adaptable than Bloodletters in terms of operating in varied environments, though they still require regular infusions of appropriate emotional energy to maintain stable manifestation. Combat doctrine employed by Daemonette forces emphasizes speed, precision, and psychological disruption over the simple, overwhelming violence favored by Khorne's demons. These forces strike at weak points in enemy formations, targeting officers, communication specialists, and other key personnel whose loss will create maximum disruption. They exploit gaps in defensive lines, flowing through openings that other attackers might not even recognize as vulnerable. The goal extends beyond simple killing to include breaking the enemy's will to fight, corrupting defenders into willing servants, and creating chaos that prevents effective resistance. When Daemonettes attack in force, they often advance in waves that build psychological pressure through repetition. The first wave engages and withdraws, giving defenders a glimpse of what they face. The second wave strikes harder, pushing deeper into defensive positions before pulling back. Each subsequent wave increases in intensity, while the defender's mental state deteriorates from accumulated stress and the lingering effects of the demon's psychic presence. By the time the final assault comes, many defenders have already broken, their minds compromised by the cumulative exposure to Slaanesh's influence. The Daemonettes maintain their assault through a combination of physical prowess and supernatural endurance that wears down even well-trained opponents. Their claws never tire, their movements never slow from fatigue, and their hypnotic grace continues unabated regardless of how long the battle rages. Human defenders, by contrast, experience mounting exhaustion, declining accuracy, and deteriorating judgment as combat extends. The Daemonettes exploit this disparity ruthlessly, maintaining pressure until their opponents collapse from sheer physical and mental depletion. The Plaguebearers of Nurgle stand in stark contrast to the frenzied Bloodletters and seductive Daemonettes, embodying neither rage nor excess, but rather a patient, inevitable decay. These demons shuffle across battlefields with methodical determination, their rotting forms releasing clouds of pestilence with every step. Where other lesser demons inspire immediate terror through obvious threat, Plaguebearers evoke a deeper, more existential dread, the recognition that all things must eventually succumb to entropy, that flesh fails, and that death comes for everything regardless of resistance. A Plaguebearer's physical form presents an anatomy textbook of advanced decomposition given ambulatory function. The skin hangs loose and pallid, displaying a greenish-gray hue that speaks of tissue long past viability. This flesh sags from the underlying structure, creating folds and wrinkles that weep continuously with various fluids. The surface appears slick with moisture, though whether this represents sweat, pus, or some other secretion remains unclear and ultimately irrelevant. What matters is that the skin itself has begun the process of separation from the body, peeling away in patches to reveal the muscle and bone beneath. The musculature visible through these gaps in the skin shows similar degradation. The tissue appears stringy and discolored, more gray than the healthy red of living muscle. These strands of meat cling to bones that themselves show signs of disease, porous and weakened in some areas, covered in strange growths in others. Despite this apparent structural failure, the Plaguebearer moves with steady purpose, its body held together through demonic, rather than biological integrity. The mechanics of its movement defy medical understanding, as joints grind bone against bone where cartilage has long since liquefied, yet the demon continues its endless march without apparent discomfort. The head of a Plaguebearer dominates the upper body, larger in proportion than human anatomy would suggest. The face, if such a term applies to the mass of corrupted flesh that fronts the skull, centers around a single enormous eye. This cyclopean orb occupies the space where a human's two eyes and much of the nose would sit, bulging from the socket with obvious pressure behind it. The eye itself appears rheumy and diseased, the sclera yellowed and threaded with burst blood vessels, the iris a murky green or brown that seems to shift in the light. This single eye tracks movement with surprising acuity, the demon's depth perception apparently unaffected by its monocular vision. A single horn protrudes from the Plaguebearer's forehead, growing at an angle that suggests it pushed through the skull rather than emerging from any natural point of origin. The horn's surface appears rough and pitted, more like diseased bone than the smooth keratin of natural horns. Some Plaguebearers display horns that curve gracefully backward, while others sport straight spikes or even branching growths that resemble coral formations. The size varies considerably between individuals, from small nubs barely longer than a finger to elaborate protrusions that extend a foot or more from the skull. Below the eye sits a mouth that stretches too wide, the lips cracked and bleeding from lesions that never heal. The teeth within appear brown and decayed, many missing entirely while others hang loose in infected gums. The tongue, when visible, shows a coating of white or yellow that speaks of thrush and other oral infections. Despite the apparent dysfunction of this orifice, Plaguebearers use their mouths constantly, muttering and counting in voices that rasp with fluid-filled lungs and damaged vocal cords. The torso of a Plaguebearer displays the full catalog of Nurgle's gifts. The chest cavity appears distended, swollen with gases and fluids that accumulate within diseased organs. The belly protrudes obscenely, stretched tight in some areas while sagging loose in others, creating a topography of decay that shifts with the demon's movement. Open sores and suppurating wounds cover every inch of exposed flesh, each one weeping a different color and consistency of discharge. Some wounds appear fresh, their edges red and inflamed, while others show the brown crust of old injuries that refuse to close. A few display the green-black of gangrene, the tissue around them already dead, yet somehow still attached to the living body. Flies accompany every Plaguebearer, clouds of insects that swarm around the demon's form and crawl across its exposed wounds. These are not ordinary flies, but demon flies, creatures of the warp that serve Nurgle as his eyes and messengers. They land on the Plaguebearer's skin to feed on the various fluids seeping from its body, then take flight again to spread contagion to nearby victims. The constant buzzing of these insects creates an auditory signature that often precedes a Plaguebearer's arrival, the sound building from a distant drone to an overwhelming roar as the demon approaches. Each Plaguebearer carries a plague sword, a rusted and pitted blade that drips with supernatural contagion. These weapons appear as crude, corroded implements that look barely capable of cutting butter, yet they slice through armor and flesh with supernatural ease. The blade's edge, though visibly notched and damaged, never fails to bite deep. More importantly, the plague sword carries diseases that defy medical classification. A wound from such a weapon does not simply cut, it infects, spreading corruption through the victim's body at an accelerated rate. Within hours, a simple scratch can fester into a life-threatening infection. Within days, the victim may find their flesh rotting while they still live, their body transforming into a mirror of the demon that struck them. The diseases carried by plague swords represent only a fraction of the contagions that Plaguebearers spread. Every plague-bearer serves as a walking reservoir of supernatural plagues, its body hosting dozens or even hundreds of distinct infections simultaneously. Some of these diseases exist in real space, recognizable to Imperial Medicae as variants of known pathogens. Others originate purely in the warp, impossible infections that should not be able to affect material beings, yet do so with terrible efficiency. The demon's presence alone can sicken nearby mortals, the air around it thick with viral particles and bacterial spores that seek new hosts with malevolent intelligence. Nurgle's rot stands as the most infamous of the diseases that plague-bearers carry. This supernatural plague begins with minor symptoms, a slight fever, some joint pain, perhaps a cough. These early signs seem manageable, the kind of minor illness that soldiers might try to push through rather than report to medical personnel. This represents the disease's first trap, as Nurgle's rot spreads most efficiently during this asymptomatic or minimally symptomatic phase. By the time the infection progresses to its more obvious stages, the victim has already exposed dozens or hundreds of others. The progression of Nurgle's rot follows a predictable pattern that Medicae have documented across thousands of outbreaks. The initial fever intensifies, accompanied by chills and sweating that soak through clothing. The skin develops a pallor that deepens from pale to gray-green over the course of days. Lesions appear, starting small but growing rapidly, the flesh around them blackening as tissue dies. The victim's strength fails as the disease attacks muscle tissue, leaving them too weak to stand or even lift their arms. Internal organs begin to fail in sequence, first the liver, then the kidneys, finally the heart and lungs. Throughout this decline, the victim remains conscious, fully aware of their body's betrayal, until the final hours when delirium provides merciful escape from the horror of their transformation. The true terror of Nurgle's rot manifests in its final stage. Victims who die from the disease do not remain dead. Their corpses rise as plague-bearers themselves, their souls claimed by Nurgle, and their bodies transformed into new demons to serve the plague god's will. This transformation occurs within hours of death, the flesh rippling and reforming as warp energy floods the corpse. The newly created plague-bearer retains fragments of its mortal memories, enough to recognize former comrades and exploit knowledge of defensive positions, but its personality has been subsumed entirely by Nurgle's will. These transformed victims join existing plague-bearer cohorts without hesitation, taking up plague swords and beginning their eternal count as though they had always been demons. Beyond Nurgle's rot, plague-bearers carry an arsenal of obscure warp plagues that defy conventional medical understanding. The irot causes victims' optical organs to liquefy within their sockets, the infection spreading from the eyes into the brain within days. The bone blight weakens skeletal structure until bones snap under the body's own weight, leaving victims as conscious bags of broken calcium and torn muscle. The flesh change transforms living tissue into something neither alive nor dead, a gray sludge that retains sensation while losing all structural integrity. Each of these diseases serves Nurgle's purpose of demonstrating the inevitability of decay and the futility of resistance against entropy's pull. The ritualistic behavior of plague-bearers defines their character as much as their physical corruption. These demons count constantly, their voices rising and falling in monotonous chants that catalog every disease, every victim, every blessed infection that Nurgle has created. This counting serves a specific purpose within the plague god's domain. Plague-bearers function as record keepers for Nurgle's garden, maintaining an accounting of all the decay and disease in existence. Every new plague requires documentation, every victim's suffering must be noted, every stage of decomposition demands proper tallying. The chanting of numbers creates an oppressive atmosphere on battlefields where plague-bearers manifest. The sound carries further than it should, penetrating through walls and armor to reach the ears of defenders. The voices blend together into a droning chorus that makes concentration difficult and erodes morale through sheer persistence. Soldiers report that the counting gets inside their heads, the numbers echoing in their thoughts even after the demons have been driven back. Some veterans claim they still hear the counting in quiet moments years after their encounters, the phantom voices tallying away in the back of their minds. Individual plague-bearers obsess over their assigned portion of Nurgle's great tally. Each demon maintains responsibility for specific diseases or categories of infection, tracking their spread through real space with meticulous attention. A plaguebearer might count every case of a particular flu strain, noting each new infection and death with equal importance. Another tracks the progress of rot in organic matter, tallying the decay of corpses left on battlefields across the galaxy. The specificity of these assignments varies, but the dedication remains constant. Every plaguebearer pursues its counting with single-minded focus that borders on mania. This obsessive counting extends to combat situations. Plaguebearers tally their own sword strikes, counting each blow landed and each wound inflicted. They track the number of enemies engaged, the steps taken across the battlefield, the flies buzzing around their forms. This behavior does not distract from their combat effectiveness. If anything, the ritualistic counting seems to focus the demons, providing structure to their actions. The numbers flow continuously from their ruined mouths, a running commentary on the battle's progress measured in units that make sense only to Nurgle and his servants. The organizational structure of Plaguebearer forces reflects Nurgle's sacred number, 7. The basic unit consists of 7 Plaguebearers, this squad size appearing throughout the Plague God's armies with absolute consistency. 7 squads combine to form a larger cohort of 49 demons. 7 cohorts create a grand company of 343 Plaguebearers. This pattern continues upward, each level of organization built on multiples of 7, creating a mathematical precision that seems at odds with the chaotic decay the demons embody. The significance of 7 within Nurgle's domain stems from ancient numerological associations with cycles and completion. 7 days in a week, 7 stages of disease progression, 7 types of decay. The number appears throughout natural processes related to entropy and deterioration. Nurgle claims this number as his own, building his entire military structure around its repetition. Plaguebearers understand this significance instinctively, organizing themselves into proper 7-fold formations without need for orders or direction. A group of Plaguebearers that finds itself numbering 6 or 8 will actively seek to correct this imbalance, either recruiting additional demons or sacrificing excess members to restore the proper count. The methodical approach that defines Plaguebearer behavior extends to how they spread disease on the battlefield. These demons do not rush forward in wild charges like Bloodletters or employ the swift strikes favored by Daemonettes. Instead, they advance at a steady, inexorable pace, shambling forward with the patience of decay itself. This slow movement proves deceptive, as Plaguebearers never tire, never stop, and never deviate from their advance. They walk through defensive fire with the same plodding determination they show when crossing empty terrain, ignoring wounds that would drop other demons. The clouds of contagion that surround Plaguebearer formations create area denial effects that conventional weapons cannot counter. Defenders who maintain their positions as the demons approach find themselves breathing air thick with disease, their lungs filling with spores and viral particles with each breath. Gas masks and sealed armor provide some protection, but Nurgle's plagues find ways through even the most careful precautions. A crack in a seal, a moment when a soldier lifts their mask to drink, a tear in protective clothing, any breach becomes a vector for infection. The Plaguebearers simply continue their advance, knowing that time works in their favor, that every second of exposure increases the likelihood of successful transmission. When Plaguebearers finally close to melee range, they fight with the same methodical approach they show in all things. Their plague swords rise and fall in steady rhythm, each strike calculated and deliberate. They do not waste motion on elaborate techniques or flashy maneuvers. The sword comes up, the sword comes down, the blade cuts, the victim sickens. This efficiency makes them dangerous opponents despite their apparent sluggishness, as their attacks come with mechanical regularity that proves difficult to defend against over extended periods. The resilience of Plaguebearers exceeds even the considerable durability common to lesser demons. Their diseased bodies absorb tremendous damage without apparent effect, wounds that should be crippling merely adding to the catalog of injuries they already display. A Plaguebearer struck by lasgun fire continues its advance, the burned flesh around the impact site simply becoming another suppurating wound among many. Bolter rounds blow chunks from their bodies, yet the demons shamble forward with limbs hanging by threads of corrupted muscle. Even decapitation does not guarantee immediate cessation of function. Headless plaguebearers have been observed taking several more steps and swinging their plague swords before finally collapsing. This supernatural durability stems from the plaguebearer's fundamental nature as an embodiment of disease and decay. These demons exist in a state of perpetual dying without ever quite reaching death, their forms sustained by the same energies that power all of Nurgle's creations. Damage that would destroy other demons simply becomes part of the plaguebearer's ongoing decomposition, integrated into its existing corruption rather than representing a meaningful injury. Only complete destruction of the demon's physical manifestation forces its essence back into the warp, and even then, the plaguebearer will eventually manifest again, ready to resume its eternal count. The horrors of Tzeentch manifest the architect of fate's fundamental nature more completely than perhaps any other lesser demon embodies its patron god. Where bloodletters represent a single aspect of Khorne and plaguebearers, reflect one facet of Nurgle's domain, horrors exist as living demonstrations of change itself, their very existence a cycle of transformation that continues even through what other demons would consider death. These creatures caper and shriek across battlefields, hurling multicolored flames while cackling with manic glee, their behavior as unpredictable as the warp storms that birthed them. Pink horrors stand as the primary manifestation of Tzeentchian lesser demons, creatures whose appearance defies easy categorization. The basic form follows a roughly humanoid structure, standing perhaps as tall as a human male, though their proportions shift constantly in subtle ways that make precise measurement impossible. The skin displays a vibrant pink coloration that ranges from hot magenta to softer coral tones, the exact shade fluctuating moment to moment, as though the demon's flesh cannot settle on a single hue. This skin appears smooth and almost rubbery in texture, stretched over a body that seems to contain more mass than its volume should allow, as though the horror exists partially in dimensions beyond the three that mortals perceive. The head of a pink horror dominates its upper body, a bulbous mass that sits directly atop narrow shoulders without any visible neck. This head appears almost spherical, the surface dominated by a mouth that splits the face horizontally in a permanent grin. The mouth itself stretches impossibly wide, filled with rows of sharp, needle-like teeth that gleam white against the pink flesh. The teeth appear to grow at random angles, some pointing inward while others jut outward, creating a chaotic jumble that should make closing the mouth impossible yet somehow doesn't. The horror's tongue, visible between these teeth, writhes with independent motion, colored a deeper purple or blue that contrasts with the surrounding pink. Eyes dot the horror's head in seemingly random positions, anywhere from 3 to a dozen orbs of varying sizes staring in different directions simultaneously. These eyes display solid colors without visible pupils or sclera, yellow, green, blue, or violet, and they move independently of each other, tracking different targets or simply rolling in their sockets without apparent purpose. The placement of these eyes changes between individual horrors, no two displaying exactly the same configuration. Some sport a cluster of small eyes where a nose might be on a human face, while others feature a single large eye in the center of the forehead, with smaller orbs scattered around the skull's periphery. The limbs of pink horrors extend from the body in ways that suggest their skeletal structure operates on principles unknown to material biology. The arms appear too long, reaching past where knees would be if the demon stood upright, though horrors rarely maintain such posture for long. These arms terminate in hands bearing 3 or 4 fingers of unequal length, each digit tipped with a sharp claw. The fingers move with disturbing dexterity, capable of intricate gestures required for spell casting despite their alien configuration. The legs bend at angles that shift as the horror moves, sometimes appearing almost normal, other times bending backward like a bird's, or even sideways in ways that should make locomotion impossible. Pink horrors rarely stand still, their bodies constantly moving in a fidgeting, twitching dance that seems driven by barely contained energy. They hop from foot to foot, wave their arms in elaborate patterns, and contort their faces through a range of expressions that cycle from manic joy to exaggerated surprise to mock anger within seconds. This perpetual motion serves no obvious tactical purpose, but rather reflects the demon's fundamental nature as a creature of change and instability. A pink horror at rest represents a contradiction in terms. These demons exist in a state of constant activity, their forms and behaviors shifting continuously. The voice of a pink horror emerges as a high-pitched, cackling sound that grates on the nerves of anyone forced to listen. They speak constantly, chattering in a mixture of languages that includes Low Gothic, various Xenos tongues, and the demon language of the warp itself. The content of their speech ranges from nonsensical babbling to cryptic pronouncements to cruel mockery of their enemies, often switching between these modes mid-sentence. Multiple horrors speaking simultaneously create a wall of noise that makes communication difficult and concentration nearly impossible, the overlapping voices blending into a cacophony that seems designed to induce headaches and confusion. The most distinctive characteristic of pink horrors manifests when they suffer sufficient damage to collapse their material form. Rather than simply dissipating back into the warp like other lesser demons, a destroyed pink horror splits into two smaller entities called blue horrors. This transformation occurs instantaneously, the pink flesh tearing apart as two blue-skinned demons emerge from the rupture. The process resembles cell division accelerated to impossible speed, the single creature becoming two in the span of a heartbeat. This splitting represents more than simple multiplication. It embodies Tzeentch's nature as the god of change, demonstrating that even destruction serves as merely another form of transformation. Blue horrors stand roughly half the height of their pink progenitors, their bodies displaying a deep blue coloration that ranges from navy to bright azure. Where pink horrors cackle and cavort with manic energy, blue horrors embody bitterness and spite. Their faces twist into permanent scowls, the mouths turn down in expressions of profound dissatisfaction. The eyes, fewer in number than their pink counterparts typically possess, glare with malevolent focus rather than rolling randomly. These smaller demons move with quick, jerky motions that suggest anger barely held in check, their clawed hands clenching and unclenching as though eager to tear at something. The temperament of blue horrors contrasts sharply with the gleeful chaos of pink horrors. Where pink horrors laugh and joke even as they hurl destructive magic, blue horrors grumble and complain in voices that rasp with resentment. They mutter constantly about the unfairness of their existence, the indignity of being split from their previous form, and their hatred for everything around them. This griping never ceases, creating a background drone of negativity that proves almost as psychologically wearing as the pink horrors cackling. The blue horrors direct particular venom toward each other, the two halves of a split pink horror immediately beginning to bicker and blame one another for their current state. Blue horrors retain the capacity to wield warp flame, though their magical output proves less powerful than what pink horrors generate. The flames they produce burn with blue or purple hues rather than the multicolored fires of their larger kin. These smaller demons compensate for reduced individual power through sheer spite, attacking with vindictive determination that makes them dangerous despite their diminished size. They target wounded enemies preferentially, seeking to finish off those already injured rather than engaging fresh opponents. This behavior stems not from tactical consideration, but from pure malice. Blue horrors want to cause suffering, and wounded targets offer easier opportunities for inflicting pain. Recent observations from battlefields across the galaxy have documented the emergence of a third stage in the horror transformation cycle. When blue horrors suffer destruction, they sometimes split further into pairs of even smaller entities called brimstone horrors. These tiny demons, also called yellow horrors by some imperial observers, stand no taller than a human child. Their skin glows with a yellow-orange luminescence that gives them their name, the flesh appearing to burn from within without being consumed. Brimstone horrors possess minimal intelligence compared to their progenitors, operating on pure instinct and spite. They attack by immolating themselves, rushing toward enemies and detonating in bursts of warp flame that consume their manifestation while scorching everything nearby. The existence of brimstone horrors represents a relatively recent development in imperial understanding of Tzeentchian demons, with the first confirmed reports emerging within the last few centuries. Whether these entities represent a new evolution in horror biology or simply went unnoticed in earlier conflicts remains a subject of debate among Ordo Malleus investigators. Some theorize that Tzeentch has altered the nature of his demons in response to changing conditions in the galaxy, while others suggest brimstone horrors always existed but rarely manifested until recent increases in warp activity made their appearance more common. The truth, like so much involving the Changer of Ways, remains obscured behind layers of uncertainty and contradiction. The capacity to wield warp flame defines the horror's role on the battlefield as much as their transformative nature. Pink horrors generate these flames through innate sorceress ability, channeling raw warp energy through their bodies and projecting it as coherent bolts of fire. The flames emerge from the horror's hands in streams of impossible colors: pink, blue, green, purple, and shades that exist only in the warp and cause discomfort to look upon directly. These fires burn with supernatural heat that ignores conventional protections. Armor designed to disperse thermal energy provides little defense, as warp flame operates on principles that bypass physical laws. The fire burns not just flesh and metal, but also the soul, inflicting damage on both material and psychic levels simultaneously. The range at which horrors can project their flames exceeds what most infantry weapons achieve, allowing them to engage enemies from relative safety. A pink horror can hurl warp fire accurately at targets 100 meters distant, the flames arcing through the air in streams that bend and twist in ways ballistic projectiles never could. This range advantage makes horror packs function as arcane artillery, raining destruction on enemy positions from beyond effective retaliation distance. The flames splash against armor and fortifications, flowing around obstacles to reach defenders sheltering behind cover. Conventional defensive tactics prove less effective against attacks that can curve around barriers and seep through gaps too small for solid projectiles. The unpredictable nature of warp flame manifests in its inconsistent effects on targets. A stream of fire that incinerates one victim might merely singe the next, while a third target struck by the same horror's flames could find their armor melting like wax despite being farther from the source. This variability stems from the flame's connection to the warp, where concepts like distance and intensity remain fluid. Tzeentch's nature as the god of change ensures that even the weapons his demons wield operate inconsistently, their effects shifting based on factors that mortal minds cannot comprehend or predict. Defenders facing horror packs quickly learn that previous observations about the demon's firepower provide little guidance for current engagements, as the flame's behavior changes from moment to moment. Beyond their flame-throwing capabilities, pink horrors possess access to a broader range of sorcerous powers that manifest unpredictably during combat. Some horrors demonstrate the ability to warp space around themselves, teleporting short distances in flashes of colored light. Others project illusions that confuse targeting systems and deceive observers about the demon's true positions. Certain horrors exhibit powers of transmutation, their touch transforming metal into glass or stone into liquid. The specific abilities any given horror displays seem to vary randomly, with individual demons showing different powers in each manifestation. This unpredictability makes tactical planning against horror forces exceptionally difficult, as commanders cannot reliably predict what capabilities the demons will demonstrate. The organizational behavior of horror packs reflects Tzeentch's nature as thoroughly as their individual characteristics. These demons gather in groups that shift constantly in size and composition, with individual horrors wandering between packs seemingly at random. The sacred number of Tzeentch, 9, appears in their formations, but not with the rigid consistency that marks Plaguebearer organization. A pack might contain 9 horrors at one moment, then split as 3 wander off to join another group, leaving 6 behind. Those 6 might attract 4 more from a passing pack, creating a group of 10 that then splits into a group of 9 and a lone horror that capers off alone. This constant flux makes accurate counting of horror numbers nearly impossible during active combat. The internal dynamics of horror packs demonstrate the chaotic and anarchic nature of Tzeentchian demons. Pink horrors scheme against each other constantly, each demon pursuing its own incomprehensible agenda while nominally cooperating with the pack. They play tricks on one another, redirect their fellows' warp flames toward unintended targets, and generally create as much chaos within their own ranks as they inflict on enemies. This behavior stems not from any genuine conflict, but rather from the demon's nature as fragments of the god of plots and schemes. They cannot help but engage in constant manipulation and counter-manipulation, even when such behavior serves no tactical purpose. The cackling madness that characterizes horror behavior intensifies when multiple packs operate in proximity. The demons feed off each other's chaotic energy, their laughter building into a crescendo that echoes across battlefields. This sound carries psychic weight, affecting the minds of those who hear it in ways that transcend simple noise. Soldiers exposed to prolonged horror cackling report difficulty maintaining focus, intrusive thoughts that derail their concentration, and a creeping sense that reality itself has become unreliable. The sound seems to seep into the brain, making rational thought increasingly difficult as the cackling continues. Some veterans develop a reflexive flinch response to high-pitched laughter even years after their encounters with horrors, the sound triggering memories of the demon's maddening mirth. Horror packs function as mobile artillery platforms in Tzeentchian demonic armies, their role distinct from the close combat focus of Bloodletters or the psychological warfare emphasis of Daemonettes. They position themselves behind the main battle line when possible, using their range advantage to pour warp flame into enemy formations, while other demon types engage in melee. This positioning allows horrors to maximize their destructive output while minimizing their exposure to return fire. The constant splitting that occurs when horrors take damage actually benefits this tactical approach. Each destroyed pink horror becomes two blue horrors that continue attacking, meaning that damaging the pack doesn't necessarily reduce its offensive capability proportionally. The symbolic significance of horrors within Tzeentch's domain extends beyond their military function. These demons embody the changer of Wei's fundamental nature through their endless transformations and unstable existence. A pink horror represents potential and possibility, its form and behavior constantly shifting to reflect change itself. The split into blue horrors demonstrates that transformation continues even through destruction, that endings serve merely as transitions to new states of being. The bitter nature of blue horrors reflects the disappointment and resentment that often accompanies unwanted change, while their continued capacity for violence shows that even diminished forms retain dangerous potential. The emergence of brimstone horrors adds another layer to this symbolism, suggesting that transformation continues indefinitely, each state giving way to the next in an endless cascade of change. The self-immolation of these smallest horrors represents the ultimate transformation, the conversion of matter and energy into pure destruction, the final change that consumes everything, including the agent of change itself. Yet even this apparent finality proves temporary, as the demon's essence returns to the warp to eventually manifest again, the cycle beginning anew. Mutation serves as another expression of the change that horrors embody. These demons display tremendous variety in their physical forms, far more so than the relatively uniform appearance of Bloodletters or the standardized corruption of Plaguebearers. Some pink horrors sport additional limbs that sprout from unexpected locations on their bodies. Others display tentacles instead of arms, or possess multiple heads that argue with each other in different voices. Wings occasionally emerge from a horror's back, feathered or leathery or composed of pure flame. These mutations appear and disappear between manifestations, ensuring that no two encounters with the same demon produce identical observations. The instability that defines horrors manifests not just in their physical forms, but in their very existence within real space. These demons flicker and waver like flames in wind, their outlines blurring as though they cannot maintain complete solidity. This visual instability makes them difficult targets for conventional weapons, as aiming at a horror requires accounting for constant shifts in position that occur on scales too small and fast for human reflexes to track effectively. Automated targeting systems fare little better, their algorithms struggling to lock onto entities whose position and velocity change according to rules that violate physical laws. The relationship between horrors and the warp storms that frequently accompany their manifestations demonstrates their connection to raw change and chaos. These demons emerge most readily during periods of high warp turbulence, when the barrier between dimensions grows thin and unstable. The presence of horror packs seems to amplify this instability, creating feedback loops where their manifestation weakens reality further, allowing more horrors to cross over. Battlefields where significant horror forces operate often experience localized reality distortions, colors becoming too bright or shifting to impossible hues, sounds echoing from directions they shouldn't, and physical laws behaving inconsistently. Gravity might fluctuate in intensity, time might flow at different rates in different locations, and the fundamental constants that govern material existence become negotiable suggestions rather than absolute rules. The Furies occupy a unique and tragic position within the hierarchy of demonic entities, standing apart from the regimented legions of the four great chaos gods. These creatures exist as the rejected, the souls deemed unworthy of service to Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, or Slaanesh. Where other demons emerge from concentrated streams of specific emotions and carry fragments of their patron god's consciousness, Furies coalesce from mortal souls that committed themselves to chaos, yet failed to earn the favor of any single deity. Their existence represents a cautionary tale written in flesh and warped stuff, a demonstration that damnation comes in many forms, and that service to the ruinous powers guarantees neither reward nor recognition. The origin of Furies stems from a particular category of failure in the eyes of the dark gods. Mortals who turn to chaos typically do so through specific pathways. A warrior's bloodlust draws Khorne's attention, a scholar's obsessive pursuit of knowledge attracts Tzeentch, acceptance of mortality and decay opens the door to Nurgle, while the pursuit of sensation and perfection leads to Slaanesh. Some individuals, however, approach chaos without sufficient dedication to any particular aspect. They dabble in forbidden rituals without committing fully to a path, worship chaos undivided without understanding what that truly means, or simply prove too weak, too indecisive, or too fundamentally flawed to catch the interest of any god. When such souls die or become consumed by the warp, they find themselves claimed by chaos itself, rather than by any individual deity. The transformation into a Fury strips away almost everything that made the original soul distinct. Memories fade to fragments, personality dissolves into base instinct, and intelligence collapses to animal cunning. What remains is a creature driven by insatiable hunger and eternal rage at its rejection, a being that exists in a state of perpetual torment. The Fury retains just enough awareness to understand what it has lost, the chance for apotheosis, the opportunity to serve a god and perhaps earn greater rewards, the possibility of maintaining some fragment of its former self. This knowledge gnaws at the Fury constantly, fueling the fury that gives these creatures their name. The physical form of a Fury reflects its rejected status through a hodgepodge of characteristics drawn from all four chaos gods without the refinement that marks the lesser demons of any single deity. The basic structure follows a humanoid pattern, though twisted and corrupted beyond any chance of passing for human. The torso appears emaciated, the ribs visible through skin stretched tight over a skeletal frame. Muscle exists, but in stringy, inadequate amounts that suggest starvation, though Furies require no physical sustenance. The arms extend too long, the joints bending at angles that allow for quadrupedal movement as easily as bipedal locomotion. The hands terminate in claws that appear as crude, jagged talons, lacking the refined lethality of a bloodletter's weapons or the delicate precision of a Daemonette's pincers. The legs of a Furies follow similar proportions to the arms, allowing the creature to drop to all fours and scuttle across surfaces like some oversized insect. The feet end in more claws, these designed for gripping rather than slashing, capable of finding purchase on vertical surfaces and even clinging to ceilings. This climbing ability makes Furies dangerous in urban environments and interior spaces, where their capacity to attack from unexpected angles proves most effective. The claws leave deep gouges in stone and metal, scoring surfaces with the marks of their passage. The head sits atop a neck that appears too thin to support it, creating the impression that the skull might topple forward at any moment. The face combines features that echo all four chaos gods without fully embodying any. The mouth stretches wide, filled with fangs that vary in size and shape, some pointed like needles while others appear as flat, grinding surfaces. The teeth grow at random angles, creating a maw that looks more like a trap lined with broken glass than a functional jaw. The eyes, when visible, glow with a dull red or yellow light that suggests banked coals rather than active flame. Some Furies display a single cyclopean eye reminiscent of Plaguebearers, while others sport multiple orbs scattered across their skulls in patterns that echo pink horrors. The skin color varies dramatically between individuals, ranging from pallid gray to sickly green to bruised purple, often displaying multiple hues in blotchy patches that suggest disease or bruising. The most distinctive feature of any Fury manifests in the wings that sprout from its back. These appendages appear as leathery membranes stretched between elongated finger bones, resembling bat wings but scaled to support a creature of human mass. The membrane itself displays a translucent quality, thin enough that light passes through it to reveal the network of veins and the skeletal structure beneath. Tears and holes mar many Furies' wings, damage that never fully heals, yet somehow fails to prevent flight. The wings attach to the shoulder blades and extend down the back, the joints allowing for complex articulation that enables the aerial maneuvers these creatures employ in combat. The size of Fury wings exceeds what strict aerodynamics would require, suggesting that their flight relies partially on warp energy manipulation rather than pure physical lift. When spread fully, the wingspan can reach 3 meters or more, the membranes catching air and something more, currents in the immaterium that provide additional support. The wings beat with powerful strokes that generate surprising speed, allowing Furies to cover ground rapidly and execute sharp turns that conventional aircraft cannot match. The sound of these wing beats carries across battlefields, a leathery flapping that experienced soldiers learn to recognize as a warning of incoming aerial assault. The mutations that distinguish individual Furies from one another stem from the chaotic nature of their creation. Without a single patron god to impose structure on their forms, Furies emerge from the warp displaying random characteristics that reflect the turbulent energies that birthed them. Some sprout additional limbs, a third arm extending from the torso, or a vestigial leg dangling uselessly from the hip. Others display tentacles growing from unexpected locations, these appendages writhing with independent motion, but lacking the strength or coordination to serve any useful purpose. Horns appear on some specimens, ranging from small nubs to elaborate curved protrusions, while others remain smooth-skulled. Tails emerge from the base of the spine on certain Furies, these varying from short stubs to long, whip-like appendages tipped with bony spurs. The variation extends to the creature's overall proportions and features. Some Furies appear more skeletal than others, their bones visible through almost translucent skin. Others display a bloated quality, the belly distended as though filled with gas or fluid. The length of limbs varies significantly, with some specimens sporting arms that drag the ground, while others possess stubby appendages barely long enough to reach the mouth. This inconsistency makes identifying Furies as a unified species difficult for observers unfamiliar with demonic taxonomy. The creatures appear as a collection of random monsters, rather than members of a coherent category. The sounds Furies produce during flight and combat contribute to their psychological impact on defenders. These creatures shriek constantly, their voices combining elements of human screaming with animal howls and sounds that have no natural equivalent. The shrieking carries a psychic component that affects listeners on a level beyond simple noise, triggering primal fear responses that bypass rational thought. Soldiers hearing the approach of Fury packs report feeling their hearts race and their hands shake before they consciously recognize the threat. The sound seems to reach into the brain and activate the most primitive survival instincts, the parts of human consciousness that remember when humanity's ancestors were prey animals fleeing from predators. The tactical deployment of Furies across battlefields reflects their status as unaligned entities available to all chaos forces regardless of patron deity. These creatures serve as aerial scouts and harrying forces, roles that capitalize on their flight capability and vicious close combat potential, while keeping them separated from the more valued demon troops that serve specific gods. Chaos commanders employ Furies as expendable assets, throwing them at targets where losses are expected and acceptable. The creatures prove useful for reconnaissance, their aerial mobility allowing them to survey terrain and identify enemy positions from angles that ground-bound forces cannot access. Furies excel at harassment tactics that disrupt enemy formations without requiring the creatures to hold ground or maintain extended engagements. They dive from above, raking defenders with their claws before climbing back to altitude, then repeat the process. These hit-and-run attacks prove difficult to counter with conventional anti-aircraft weapons, as Furies fly lower and more erratically than aircraft while moving faster and more unpredictably than jump infantry. The creatures exploit gaps in defensive coverage, striking at support elements, supply lines, and command posts rather than engaging hardened front-line positions. A pack of Furies swooping down on an artillery position can kill or scatter the gun crews in seconds, then withdraw before reinforcements arrive. The hunger that drives Furies manifests as an insatiable craving for mortal souls. These creatures seek to consume the life essence of living beings, draining the spiritual energy that sustains consciousness and individuality. The act of feeding provides Furies with temporary relief from the gnawing emptiness that defines their existence, a brief respite from the awareness of their rejected status. This hunger drives them to take risks that more intelligent demons would avoid, diving into defensive fire or pursuing isolated targets deep into enemy territory. The promise of souls to consume overrides whatever limited self-preservation instinct Furies possess, making them predictable in their aggression, even as their specific attack vectors remain difficult to anticipate. The process by which Furies drain souls occurs through direct physical contact, the creature's claws and fangs serving as conduits for the transfer of spiritual energy. A victim caught by a Fury experiences a cold that has nothing to do with temperature, a chill that seems to originate from within their own chest and spread outward. The sensation accompanies the actual draining, as the Fury pulls life force from the victim's body into its own. Victims who survive such attacks report feeling hollow afterward, as though something essential has been carved out of them. They recover physically but often display psychological changes, reduced emotional range, difficulty forming new memories, or a persistent sense of disconnection from their own experiences. The eternal torment that characterizes Fury existence stems from the creature's retention of just enough awareness to understand their situation without possessing the capacity to change it. They remember fragments of their mortal lives, enough to recognize that they once possessed identity and agency. They understand that other demons serve gods who grant power and purpose, while Furies serve no one and receive nothing beyond bare existence. This knowledge creates a feedback loop of rage and despair that the creatures cannot escape. The hunger for souls provides temporary distraction from this existential anguish, making the pursuit and consumption of life force the only activity that offers any relief from their torment. The rejection by the Chaos Gods that defines Fury origin carries implications that extend beyond simple exclusion from their ranks. In the hierarchy of the Warp, status flows from connection to power, and the Chaos Gods represent the greatest concentrations of power in the Immaterium. Demons that serve these gods exist as extensions of divine will, their actions carrying meaning and purpose within the larger schemes of their patrons. Furies lack this connection, and thus lack meaning. They exist as cosmic refuse, the byproduct of chaos corruption that failed to achieve anything significant. This status makes them objects of contempt even among other demons, who view Furies as failures and treat them accordingly. Despite their rejected status, Furies prove surprisingly common across warp-infested regions of the galaxy. The souls that become Furies represent a significant percentage of mortals who fall to chaos, those who lack the strength of conviction, purity of obsession, or simple luck required to earn a god's favor. Cultists who dabble in forbidden rituals without truly committing, renegade soldiers who turn to chaos out of desperation rather than belief, and countless others who touch the warp without understanding what they invite all risk transformation into Furies upon death. The Eye of Terror and other major warp rifts contain Fury populations numbering in the millions, vast swarms of these rejected demons that circle endlessly through the Immaterium's currents. The use of Furies by forces aligned with specific Chaos Gods demonstrates the pragmatic nature of demonic warfare. While the gods themselves show no interest in these unaligned creatures, their greater servants recognize useful tools when they see them. Bloodthirsters employ Fury packs as scouts and skirmishers, using the creature's aerial mobility to identify targets for bloodletter assaults. Lords of Change manipulate Furies through sorcery, directing them toward objectives that serve Tzeentchian schemes without wasting more valuable pink horrors on such tasks. Great Unclean Ones send Furies ahead to spread fear and confusion, softening enemy morale before Plaguebearer cohorts arrive. Keepers of Secrets use these creatures as disposable shock troops, throwing them at defensive positions to expend ammunition and reveal enemy capabilities before committing Daemonettes to the assault. The Furies themselves possess no loyalty to these commanders or their gods, following orders only because they lack the strength to resist and because cooperation offers opportunities to feed. A Fury pack commanded by a Bloodthirster will execute its assigned tasks, but the creatures feel no devotion to Khorne or his greater demon. They obey because the alternative is destruction or starvation, and because carrying out orders eventually leads to combat where souls become available for consumption. This mercenary relationship characterizes all Fury deployments. The creatures serve whoever currently controls them, switching allegiances without hesitation when circumstances change. The aerial nature of Fury attacks creates specific challenges for Imperial defenders that differ from the threats posed by ground-based demon incursions. Standard defensive doctrine emphasizes creating interlocking fields of fire at ground level, establishing kill zones that force attackers to advance through concentrated firepower. These tactics prove less effective against enemies that approach from above, requiring defenders to divide their attention and firepower between ground and aerial threats. Furies exploit this division, timing their attacks to coincide with ground assaults by other demon types. While Bloodletters charge defensive lines from the front, Furies dive from above to strike at defenders from behind, creating chaos that prevents effective response to either threat. Anti-aircraft weapons prove partially effective against Fury packs, though the creature's small size and erratic flight patterns reduce hit probability significantly. Hydra flak tanks and Icarus lascannons can bring down Furies when they achieve solid targeting locks, but the demons rarely fly in straight lines or maintain consistent altitude long enough for easy targeting. The creatures instinctively jink and weave, their flight paths following patterns that seem random but effectively minimize exposure to defensive fire. Experienced Fury packs demonstrate learned behavior that suggests some capacity for tactical adaptation. They identify the locations of anti-aircraft weapons and approach from angles that maximize cover from terrain features, or they time their attacks for moments when defensive guns are engaged with other targets. The psychological impact of Fury attacks compounds the physical threat these creatures pose. The sight of winged demons diving from the sky triggers deep-seated fears that rational training struggles to overcome. Human evolution occurred on a planet where threats from above, birds of prey, falling objects, aerial predators, represented significant dangers that shaped survival instincts. Furies tap into these ancient fears, their aerial attacks triggering responses that bypass conscious thought. Soldiers who maintain discipline against ground-based demon assaults sometimes break when Furies enter the battle, the combination of shrieking and aerial attack proving too much for their courage to withstand. The wounds inflicted by Fury claws and fangs carry additional dangers beyond the immediate physical damage. The creature's touch drains spiritual energy, and their claws often carry fragments of warp corruption that infect wounds with demonic taint. Victims who survive Fury attacks require careful monitoring for signs of possession or mutation, as the demonic essence transferred through those wounds can take root in mortal flesh. Medical personnel treating such injuries follow strict protocols that include psychic screening, and in severe cases, immediate execution if corruption proves too advanced to purge. The number of soldiers lost to post-battle corruption from Fury wounds sometimes exceeds the casualties inflicted during the actual combat. The manifestation of Furies in real space follows the same general principles that govern all demonic incursions, requiring breaches in the barrier between dimensions or sufficient warp energy to sustain their presence. However, Furies prove somewhat easier to summon than demons aligned with specific gods, as their unaligned nature means they respond to a broader range of rituals and conditions. Cultists lacking the knowledge or resources to summon god-specific demons can still call forth Furies through less demanding ceremonies. This accessibility makes Furies common threats even in regions where major demonic incursions remain rare, as small cults and individual sorcerers can manifest these creatures without the extensive preparation required for summoning Bloodletters or Plaguebearers. The sustaining energy that maintains Fury manifestations in real space comes from base emotions, rather than the specific feelings that feed God-aligned demons. Fear, desperation, and suffering of any kind provide nourishment for Furies, making them less dependent on particular battlefield conditions than their more specialized counterparts. A Bloodletter requires violence and rage to sustain its presence, but a Fury can feed on the terror of fleeing civilians or the despair of starving refugees. This flexibility allows Furies to operate in environments where other demons would quickly weaken, making them persistent threats in occupied territories and warp-tainted regions where the barrier between dimensions remains permanently compromised. The Nurglings of Nurgle occupy a position within the demonic hierarchy that defies the expectations established by other lesser demons. Where Bloodletters, Daemonettes, Plaguebearers, and Horrors manifest as distinct warrior entities designed for specific combat roles, Nurglings emerge as something altogether different, diminutive creatures born not from concentrated mortal emotion, but from the physical substance of Nurgle himself. These tiny demons bubble forth from the pustules, boils, and suppurating wounds that cover the plague god's immense body, each one a fragment of his consciousness given independent form. They represent Nurgle's jovial nature made manifest, embodying the god's paradoxical capacity for good humor and affection despite his dominion over disease and decay. The origin of Nurglings directly from Nurgle's flesh marks them as fundamentally different from other demon types. A Bloodletter coalesces from warp currents saturated with rage and violence, drawing its existence from mortal emotion. A Nurgling, by contrast, literally grows within the plague god's body, gestating in the infected tissue until it achieves sufficient mass and awareness to split free. The process resembles the bursting of a particularly ripe abscess, the Nurgling emerging in a spray of pus and ichor that quickly reforms into the demon's diminutive shape. This direct physical connection to their patron god creates a bond between Nurglings and Nurgle that exceeds the relationship other demons share with their creators. They are not merely servants or extensions of his will, they are, in a very literal sense, pieces of him. The physical form of a Nurgling presents a grotesque parody of infant proportions rendered in the medium of decay. These creatures stand no taller than a human toddler, their bodies displaying the rounded, chubby characteristics associated with very young children. The resemblance ends there, as every aspect of their physiology reflects Nurgle's gifts. The skin appears bloated and discolored, ranging from sickly yellow-green to mottled brown, stretched tight over a body swollen with gases and fluids. The surface glistens with moisture, a constant sheen of slime that coats the Nurgling and leaves trails wherever it moves. This coating serves multiple purposes. It makes the creatures difficult to grasp, provides a medium for bacterial growth, and carries concentrated doses of various diseases that transfer to anything the Nurgling touches. The head sits atop a neck so thick and short that it barely exists as a distinct anatomical feature, the skull appearing to rest directly on rounded shoulders. The face displays features that might read as cute if rendered in healthy flesh: large eyes, a small nose, a wide mouth, but the corruption transforms these characteristics into something disturbing. The eyes bulge from their sockets, too large for the skull that contains them, the whites yellowed and threaded with burst blood vessels. The pupils appear as dark pits that track movement with unsettling intelligence, the gaze of a Nurgling carrying awareness that contradicts its infantile appearance. The nose exists as a small nub marked by constantly running discharge, thick ropes of mucus that the Nurgling occasionally wipes away with stubby fingers only to have the flow resume immediately. The mouth stretches wide when the Nurgling grins, which it does frequently, revealing rows of tiny teeth in various states of decay. Some teeth appear brown and rotten, others broken or missing entirely, while a few display the white of healthy enamel in jarring contrast to their corrupted neighbors. The tongue, visible between these teeth, appears swollen and coated with a white film that suggests thrush or other oral infection. Despite the apparent dysfunction of this orifice, Nurglings use their mouths constantly to laugh, to bite, to taste everything they encounter with the indiscriminate curiosity of actual infants exploring their environment. The body of a Nurgling displays the distended belly characteristic of Nurgle's aesthetic, the stomach protruding in a round mass that seems too large for the creature's frame to support. This belly jiggles when the Nurgling moves, the surface occasionally rippling as though something shifts beneath the skin. The chest appears similarly swollen, the ribs invisible beneath layers of bloated tissue. Arms extend from the shoulders in stubby limbs that end in hands bearing 3 or 4 fingers of unequal length. These fingers terminate in small claws that appear more suitable for scratching than serious combat, though they prove sharp enough to draw blood and carry infection into any wound they create. The legs follow similar proportions to the arms, short and thick, ending in feet that display surprising dexterity. Nurglings can climb with remarkable agility despite their ungainly appearance, those stubby fingers and toes finding purchase on surfaces that should offer no grip. The creatures scramble up walls, across ceilings, and through spaces that seem too small to accommodate their bulk, their bodies squeezing and compressing in ways that suggest bonelessness. This mobility makes them difficult to contain or escape from, as barriers that would stop larger demons prove permeable to Nurgling infiltration. Boils, pustules, and open sores cover every inch of a Nurgling's body, these lesions weeping continuously with various fluids. Some discharge clear serum, others produce thick yellow pus, while certain sores leak darker substances that range from brown to black. The Nurgling displays no discomfort from these conditions, treating its suppurating wounds as normal and unremarkable. Indeed, the creatures seem to take pride in particularly impressive boils, showing them off to their fellows and occasionally squeezing them to produce sprays of infection that they find endlessly amusing. The act of bursting a boil elicits giggles and squeals of delight from nearby Nurglings, their laughter high-pitched and disturbingly childlike. The behavior of Nurglings reflects Nurgle's jovial nature more than any other aspect of their existence. These creatures exhibit personalities that range from mischievous to outright playful, approaching their existence with an enthusiasm that seems at odds with their role as vectors of disease. They laugh constantly, their voices emerging as high-pitched giggles and chittering sounds that blend together when multiple Nurglings gather. This laughter carries genuine mirth rather than the manic quality of pink horror cackling or the bitter mockery of blue horror grumbling. Nurglings find joy in everything, spreading disease, playing pranks on larger demons, rolling in filth, and generally causing chaos wherever they appear. The playful malevolence that characterizes Nurgling behavior manifests in countless small acts of mischief and sabotage. These creatures delight in stealing objects, particularly items that their victims value or need. A commissar's bolt pistol might vanish from its holster, only to be found hours later buried in a pile of Nurgling droppings. Important documents disappear from command posts, later discovered chewed to pulp and mixed with various bodily fluids. Medical supplies vanish from field hospitals, the Nurglings having consumed or contaminated them beyond use. The creatures approach these thefts not as tactical sabotage, but as games, their laughter echoing through the spaces they infest as they watch their victims search frantically for missing equipment. Nurglings interact with each other in ways that resemble the play of actual children, albeit children, whose toys consist of filth and disease. They chase each other through the muck of Nurgle's garden in the warp, playing elaborate games of tag that can last for subjective centuries. They build structures from excrement and rotting matter, creating towers and fortresses that collapse under their own weight, while the Nurglings squeal with delight at the destruction. They engage in rough housing that would appear adorable if not for the fact that their wrestling matches spread infection and leave trails of slime across every surface they touch. The creatures form friendships and rivalries, displaying emotional complexity that exceeds what most lesser demons demonstrate. The relationship between Nurglings and Nurgle himself goes beyond simple creator and creation. The plague god displays genuine affection for these tiny demons, treating them as beloved pets or favored children rather than mere servants. Nurgle allows Nurglings to climb across his body, nest in his wounds, and generally behave with a familiarity that would be unthinkable for bloodletters approaching Khorne or Daemonettes interacting with Slaanesh. The plague god laughs at their antics, encourages their mischief, and shows patience with their constant demands for attention that he extends to no other demon type. This favoritism stems from the Nurgling's origin as literal pieces of himself. They are not just his creations, but his children in the most direct sense possible. The combat applications of Nurglings initially appear limited given their diminutive size and lack of obvious weapons. A single Nurgling poses minimal threat to an armed soldier, its small claws and teeth capable of inflicting only minor wounds. The danger emerges when Nurglings attack in groups, which they invariably do. These creatures swarm targets in dozens or even hundreds, their small bodies piling atop victims in a writhing mass of diseased flesh. The weight alone can drag a soldier down, pinning them beneath a mound of giggling demons that bite, scratch, and smear infection across every exposed surface. The psychological impact of being buried under a pile of Nurglings, feeling them crawl across the body while their laughter fills the ears, breaks the composure of even veteran soldiers. The infectious touch of Nurglings represents their primary weapon, each demon carrying concentrated doses of diseases that transfer through any contact with their slime-coated bodies. A Nurgling that merely brushes against exposed skin leaves behind bacterial cultures and viral particles that immediately begin seeking entry through pores and minor abrasions. The creatures actively spread this infection, wiping their hands on targets, licking equipment and weapons, and generally contaminating everything they touch. The diseases they carry range from mundane infections that any field medicae could treat to supernatural plagues that resist all conventional medicine. A soldier who survives combat with Nurglings often succumbs days later to infections that spread from minor wounds inflicted during the engagement. Nurglings demonstrate surprising tactical utility despite their apparent lack of sophistication. Larger Nurgle demons employ them as living projectiles, hurling handfuls of the creatures at enemy positions. Great Unclean Ones particularly favor this tactic, their massive hands capable of scooping up dozens of Nurglings and flinging them across battlefields. The Nurglings sail through the air shrieking with delight, treating the experience as an amusement ride rather than a combat deployment. Upon landing, they immediately scatter and begin their work of spreading disease and causing chaos. Some burrow into defensive positions, contaminating supplies and equipment. Others target specific individuals, swarming officers and specialists whose loss will create maximum disruption. The ability to overwhelm enemies through sheer numbers represents another significant combat application. Nurgling swarms can number in the hundreds or thousands, vast waves of tiny demons that flow across terrain like living floods. Individual defenders kill dozens or even scores of Nurglings, but the swarm continues advancing, each fallen demon replaced by 10 more. The creatures pile atop defensive positions, their combined mass collapsing barricades and crushing defenders through accumulated weight. Firing positions designed to resist assault by human-sized enemies prove vulnerable to infiltration by Nurgling swarms that squeeze through gaps and flow around obstacles like particularly aggressive mold. The symbiotic relationship between Nurglings and larger Nurgle demons extends beyond simple tactical cooperation into actual physical cohabitation. Great Unclean Ones, the greater demons of Nurgle, host entire colonies of Nurglings within their massive bodies. The tiny demons nest in the folds of the greater demon's flesh, burrow into open wounds, and generally treat the Great Unclean One's body as a combination home and playground. The greater demon tolerates and even encourages this infestation, viewing the Nurglings as welcome company and useful assistants. The small demons help maintain their host's corruption, spreading disease through the greater demon system and keeping infections active and virulent. Plague Marines, the Chaos Space Marines dedicated to Nurgle, similarly play host to Nurgling infestations. These corrupted warriors carry the tiny demons within their armor, the Nurglings nesting in the spaces between ceramite plates and corrupted flesh. The demons emerge during combat to assist their hosts, crawling out through gaps in the armor to attack enemies or perform minor tasks that aid the Plague Marine's efforts. A Plague Marine might release a handful of Nurglings to contaminate an enemy's water supply, or send them to sabotage ammunition stores, or simply let them loose to spread chaos through enemy ranks. The relationship proves mutually beneficial. The Plague Marine gains versatile support troops that require no maintenance or supply, while the Nurglings receive protection, transportation, and regular opportunities to spread disease. The Nurglings infesting Plague Marine armor demonstrate remarkable intelligence in supporting their hosts. They perform maintenance tasks that keep the corrupted equipment functional, their small hands capable of reaching into spaces too small for the Plague Marine's gauntlets. They patch holes in armor with improvised materials, clear blockages from weapon mechanisms, and generally ensure their host remains combat effective. This behavior stems not from training or orders, but from the Nurglings' instinctive understanding that their survival depends on their host's continued function. A destroyed Plague Marine means the loss of their mobile home and protection, motivating the Nurglings to actively contribute to combat effectiveness. The tendency of Nurglings to infest larger demons and corrupted warriors creates logistical challenges for Nurgle forces that other Chaos armies avoid. Every Great Unclean One carries hundreds or thousands of Nurglings, and each Plague Marine hosts dozens more. These populations require management despite their small size, as uncontrolled Nurgling swarms can interfere with allied operations as readily as they disrupt enemy activities. The creatures steal from everyone indiscriminately, their mischief targeting friend and foe alike. Nurgle commanders tolerate this behavior because the benefits outweigh the annoyances, but it means that any force including significant Nurgling populations must account for constant minor disruptions and the need to regularly retrieve stolen equipment from Nurgling nests. The manifestation of Nurglings in real space follows slightly different patterns than other demon types due to their origin from Nurgle's body rather than mortal emotion. These creatures emerge most readily in locations where the plague god's influence has grown strong, where disease and decay have weakened the barrier between dimensions. A plague outbreak that reaches sufficient severity can thin the veil enough for Nurglings to slip through, the tiny demons appearing spontaneously in contaminated areas. They materialize in sewers, refuse heaps, and anywhere filth accumulates in sufficient quantity, emerging from the muck fully formed and ready to spread further corruption. The sustaining energy that maintains Nurgling manifestations comes from the presence of disease and decay rather than specific emotions. A hospital full of plague victims provides ideal conditions for Nurgling activity, the concentrated suffering and physical corruption creating an environment where the demons can persist indefinitely. Battlefields strewn with rotting corpses similarly support Nurgling populations, the decomposing flesh providing both sustenance and nesting material. The creatures prove remarkably persistent once established, capable of maintaining manifestation in environments where other demons would quickly weaken. This durability makes Nurgling infestations difficult to eliminate, as purging them requires not just killing the visible demons, but also cleansing the corruption that sustains their presence. The infectious nature of Nurglings extends beyond the diseases they carry to include their capacity to corrupt locations through simple presence. Areas where Nurglings gather begin to show signs of Nurgle's influence within days. Vegetation withers and rots, water sources become contaminated, and the air itself grows thick with the smell of decay. The creatures leave trails of slime that never fully dry, creating permanent stains on floors and walls. Their droppings accumulate in corners and hidden spaces, each deposit a concentrated source of infection that continues spreading disease long after the Nurglings themselves have moved on. Cleansing a location of Nurgling infestation requires extensive decontamination efforts that often prove more resource-intensive than simply abandoning the site entirely. The psychological impact of Nurgling encounters differs significantly from the terror inspired by other demon types, where Bloodletters provoke immediate fear through obvious threat and Daemonettes unsettle through their twisted beauty. Nurglings create a sense of wrongness that operates on a more subtle level. Their childlike appearance and playful behavior clash with their role as disease vectors, creating cognitive dissonance that many soldiers find deeply disturbing. The sound of Nurgling laughter echoing through contaminated spaces proves particularly effective at eroding morale, the innocent quality of the sound making it somehow worse than the shrieking of furies or the cackling of horrors. Defenders report feeling violated by Nurgling presence in ways they struggle to articulate, as though the creature's very existence represents an offense against natural order. The strategic value of Nurglings lies not in their combat prowess, but in their capacity to create lasting disruption that persists long after battles conclude. A bloodletter assault either succeeds or fails within hours, the demons killing everyone in reach or being driven back into the warp. Nurgling infestations, by contrast, create problems that compound over time. The diseases they spread continue killing for weeks or months after the initial contact. The contamination they leave behind renders locations unusable without extensive cleanup. The psychological damage from their presence affects morale across entire units, as soldiers who survived Nurgling encounters spread stories that undermine the confidence of troops who haven't yet faced these demons. This lingering impact makes Nurglings force multipliers despite their small size, each infestation creating ripples that affect operations across entire sectors. The Flamers of Tzeentch embody the Changer of Ways' dominion over mutation and transformation through their very existence as living weapons of Warpflame. These demons manifest as grotesque amalgamations of flesh and fire, their bodies defying anatomical logic while somehow maintaining coherent function. Where pink horrors represent change through their splitting and transformation, Flamers demonstrate mutation's capacity to create forms that should not exist yet do, creatures whose physical structure operates according to principles that violate every law of biology and physics simultaneously. The basic anatomy of a Flamer centers around a bulbous, sac-like body that appears to float above the ground rather than walk upon it. This central mass displays a texture that shifts between smooth, almost rubbery flesh and rough, scale-like surfaces depending on angle and lighting. The coloration pulses through a spectrum of pinks, purples, and blues, the hues bleeding into each other without clear boundaries. The body itself appears inflated, as though filled with gas or liquid under pressure, the surface stretched tight and occasionally rippling with internal movement. This central sac serves as both the demon's torso and its primary reservoir for the warp flame it projects, the interior containing roiling energies that leak through the skin in wisps of colored smoke. From this central body emerge multiple appendages that defy any attempt at classification as arms, tentacles, or something else entirely. The number varies between individual Flamers, with some displaying as few as 3 limbs, while others sport a dozen or more. These appendages extend from the body at seemingly random points, growing from the top, sides, and even bottom of the central mass without regard for symmetry or balance. Each limb follows a serpentine structure, beginning thick where it connects to the body and tapering toward its terminus. The flesh of these appendages appears more solid than the central sac, displaying a consistency somewhere between muscle and cartilage, capable of both flexibility and surprising rigidity when the demon chooses to brace itself. The most distinctive and horrifying characteristic of these appendages manifests at their tips, where each terminates not in a hand or claw, but in a fully functional mouth. These maws vary in size and configuration between individual limbs, some appearing as simple openings ringed with teeth, while others display elaborate structures complete with multiple rows of fangs, writhing tongues, and throat passages that glow with internal fire. The mouths move independently of each other and of the Flamer's main body, snapping at nearby targets, tasting the air, and constantly opening and closing in anticipation of their primary function. The teeth within these maws appear crystalline rather than organic, sharp, and translucent, glowing with the same colors that pulse through the demon's body. The head of a Flamer, if such a term applies to the mass that sits atop the central body, consists primarily of yet another mouth. This primary maw dwarfs the smaller openings at the ends of the appendages, stretching wide enough to engulf a human head. The opening appears as a vertical slit when closed, the lips sealed tight, but when the Flamer prepares to unleash its flames, the mouth gapes open to reveal a furnace-like interior. The throat glows with warp fire, colors that should not exist swirling in the depths, and heat radiates from the opening with sufficient intensity to blister exposed skin at several meters distance. Teeth ring this primary mouth in concentric circles, each row slightly smaller than the one before it, creating a spiral pattern that draws the eye inward toward the burning throat. Eyes dot the flamer's body in clusters and scattered individually across its surface, appearing wherever space permits without following any anatomical logic. These orbs range in size from tiny points barely larger than pinpricks to bulging masses the size of human fists. The eyes display solid colors without pupils or visible structure, yellows, greens, purples, and blues that shift and change as the demon moves. These organs track movement independently, each eye focusing on different targets or simply rolling in its socket without apparent purpose. The overall effect creates the impression of being watched from multiple angles simultaneously, as though the flamer perceives its surroundings through dozens of viewpoints at once. The levitating locomotion that flamers employ sets them apart from most other lesser demons. These creatures do not walk or crawl, but rather float through the air, their bodies hovering at roughly human head height above whatever surface lies beneath them. The mechanism behind this flight remains unclear even to those who have studied demonic manifestation for decades. The flamer possesses no wings, no visible means of propulsion, no jets of flame or psychic emanations that would explain its aerial mobility. It simply exists in defiance of gravity, drifting through space with the lazy grace of a jellyfish moving through water. The movement appears effortless, the demon gliding forward, backward, or sideways with equal ease, occasionally rotating around its central axis to bring different mouths to bear on targets. This floating movement allows flamers to traverse terrain that would prove impassable to ground-bound demons. They drift over obstacles without slowing, pass through narrow spaces that their bulk should prevent them from entering, and maintain consistent altitude regardless of the ground's elevation changes. The only limitation appears to be a maximum height of perhaps 10 meters above the surface. Flamers rarely rise higher than this, suggesting either a limit to their levitation capability or simply a lack of need to climb further. The slow, drifting quality of their movement creates an eerie visual effect, these bloated, mouth-covered horrors floating through battlefields like grotesque balloons, while streams of warp flame pour from their many maws. The warp flame that flamers project represents their primary weapon and their reason for existence within Tzeentch's armies. This fire bears only superficial resemblance to mundane combustion, operating according to principles that have nothing to do with oxidation or thermal energy. The flames emerge from the demons' mouths in torrents of impossible colors, pinks that hurt to look at, blues that seem to exist in more than 3 dimensions, greens that shift to purple when viewed from different angles. These fires flow like liquid while burning like gas, streams of warp energy made visible that arc through the air in defiance of ballistic trajectories. The flames bend around obstacles, split into multiple streams that recombine before impact, and generally behave in ways that make defending against them nearly impossible through conventional means. The mutagenic properties of warp flame distinguish it from any natural fire and mark it as one of the most horrifying weapons in the demon arsenal. When these flames strike a target, they do not simply burn flesh and melt armor. Instead, they rewrite the fundamental structure of whatever they touch, forcing rapid and uncontrolled transformation upon material and living tissue alike. A soldier caught in a stream of warp flame experiences changes that begin at the cellular level and cascade upward through every system in the body. DNA unravels and recombines in new patterns, proteins fold into configurations that should not exist, and the body's blueprint rewrites itself according to rules dictated by the warp rather than biology. The visible effects of warp flame exposure manifest within seconds of contact. Flesh ripples and bulges as new structures grow beneath the skin, pushing outward in lumps and protrusions that split the surface to reveal transformed tissue beneath. Bones elongate or compress, joints reverse their articulation, and limbs twist into new configurations that bear no relationship to human anatomy. Eyes multiply across the victim's face and body, appearing in clusters that blink independently. Mouths open in places where no mouth should exist, across the palms of hands, in the center of the chest, along the length of arms and legs. These new orifices prove functional, capable of speech and consumption, adding their voices to the victim's screams as the transformation continues. The mutations spread rapidly through the victim's body, each change triggering cascades of further alterations. An arm that begins to elongate sprouts additional joints halfway through its length, then splits at the elbow into multiple limbs that each develop their own hands. A leg that starts to bend backwards suddenly grows a second knee, then a third, the limb becoming a multi-jointed appendage that can no longer support the body's weight. The torso expands or contracts, ribs multiplying or fusing together, internal organs shifting position or duplicating to fill the changing cavity. The victim remains conscious throughout these transformations, their mind intact enough to comprehend what is happening to their body, even as their capacity to control it disappears. The final stage of warpflame mutation depends on the intensity and duration of exposure. Victims struck by brief bursts of flame might stabilize in forms that, while horrifically altered, retain some semblance of their original structure. These unfortunate souls survive as mutants, their bodies permanently reshaped into configurations that make normal life impossible but allow continued existence. They become pariahs, cast out from imperial society, their transformation marking them as touched by chaos regardless of whether they willingly sought such contact. Many choose death over living in their new forms, while others flee to the underhives or wilderness where mutants gather in desperate communities of the damned. Those exposed to sustained warpflame bombardment undergo transformations so extensive that their original form becomes completely unrecognizable. The human body plan dissolves entirely, replaced by masses of flesh that grow without purpose or limit. Limbs sprout and merge and split again, creating tangles of appendages that writhe without coordination. Sensory organs appear and disappear, eyes opening only to be absorbed back into the shifting tissue moments later. The victim's mass increases as new tissue generates faster than the body can organize it, the transformation feeding on itself until the original person has been completely subsumed by the mutating flesh. What remains bears no resemblance to humanity or to any other recognizable life form. It exists as pure biological chaos, a chaos spawn. Chaos spawn represent the ultimate expression of uncontrolled mutation, creatures that have transformed beyond any possibility of stability or purpose. These beings vary wildly in size and configuration, no two identical, each one a unique testament to mutation's capacity to destroy rather than create. Some spawn grow to enormous size, their bodies swelling to the dimensions of battle tanks, while their flesh continues its endless reconfiguration. Others remain roughly human-sized, but display such extreme alterations that their original nature becomes impossible to determine. All spawn share certain characteristics: constant physical change, complete loss of higher cognitive function, and an instinctive aggression toward anything that moves in their vicinity. The creation of chaos spawn through warpflame exposure serves Tzeentch's purposes in multiple ways. Most obviously, it removes enemies from the battlefield, transforming soldiers into mindless monsters that can no longer coordinate with their units or follow orders. The psychological impact on nearby troops who witness their comrades' transformation proves equally valuable, as watching a fellow soldier dissolve into a mass of mutating flesh breaks morale more effectively than simple killing. The spawn themselves provide tactical benefits, their aggression making them useful as improvised assault troops that attack anything nearby without discrimination. Tzeentchian forces sometimes deliberately create spawn from captured prisoners, then release these creatures into enemy positions where they rampage until destroyed. The tactical deployment of flamers within Tzeentch's demonic armies capitalizes on their unique combination of mobility, firepower, and area denial capabilities. These demons function as mobile heavy weapons platforms, providing devastating ranged support that complements the more numerous but less individually powerful pink horrors. A typical deployment positions flamers behind the main battle line, their levitating movement allowing them to maintain optimal firing positions while remaining protected by screening forces. From these positions, they pour torrents of warp flame over friendly troops to strike at enemies beyond, the flames passing harmlessly through allied demons while incinerating or mutating anything that serves other masters. The range at which flamers can effectively project their warp flame exceeds that of most infantry weapons, allowing them to engage targets at distances where return fire proves difficult. The flames arc through the air in streams that extend 50 meters or more before dissipating, each flamer capable of maintaining multiple simultaneous streams from its various mouths. This creates overlapping fields of fire that saturate target areas with mutagenic energy, making evasion nearly impossible for enemies caught in the kill zone. The flame's capacity to bend around cover and flow through gaps means that defensive positions provide less protection than they would against conventional weapons, as the warpfire seeks out targets behind obstacles and fills enclosed spaces with transformative energy. The psychological warfare value of flamers rivals their direct combat effectiveness. The sight of these floating, mouth-covered horrors drifting across battlefields while spouting streams of reality-warping fire proves deeply unsettling even to veteran soldiers. The knowledge that a hit from warp flame means transformation rather than clean death adds an element of existential dread to combat against these demons. Soldiers facing flamers must overcome not just the fear of dying, but the terror of surviving as something no longer human, their bodies twisted into forms that mock everything they once were. This fear manifests as hesitation, degraded accuracy, and in extreme cases, complete paralysis as soldiers freeze rather than risk exposure to the transformative flames. The connection between flamers and the winds of magic runs deeper than their simple capacity to project warp energy. These demons exist as conduits for the Immaterium's power, their bodies serving as focal points where the warp bleeds into real space. Psychers describe sensing flamers as bright points of psychic energy, their presence creating distortions in the warp that extend far beyond their physical location. This connection makes flamers particularly sensitive to psychic activity and concentrations of warp energy, drawing them toward such sources with instinctive certainty. A psyker manifesting their powers becomes a beacon that flamers sense from considerable distance, the demon's many eyes turning toward the source while their mouths gape in anticipation. The attraction that flamers feel toward psychers stems from the fundamental nature of these demons as manifestations of magical energy. Psychers channel power from the warp through their souls, creating streams of energy that flow between dimensions. Flamers perceive these streams and follow them to their source, drawn by the promise of rich feeding grounds. A psyker actively using their powers effectively announces their presence to any flamers in the vicinity, the psychic emanations serving as a dinner bell that the demons cannot ignore. This makes psychers particularly vulnerable during demonic incursions, as they attract specialized attention from entities specifically equipped to counter and consume magical energy. Locations of high warp activity similarly draw flamer attention regardless of whether psychers occupy the area. Warp rifts, sites of recent demonic manifestation, and places where the veil has grown thin all emit the kind of energy signatures that flamers seek. The demons congregate around such locations, their presence further destabilizing reality and creating feedback loops where their manifestation weakens the barrier, allowing more flamers to cross over, which weakens the barrier further. This creates concentration points where flamer populations build to dangerous levels, the demons clustering so densely that their combined warp flame output can transform entire city blocks into zones of uncontrolled mutation. The capacity of flamers to sense and target psychers makes them valuable assets in Tzeentch's eternal schemes against the Imperium. The Emperor's domain depends heavily on psychers for communication, navigation, and combat support. Astropaths maintain the network of psychic communication that binds the Imperium together across vast distances. Navigators guide ships through the warp, their third eyes piercing the Immaterium's chaos to find safe passage. Sanctioned psychers serve in military roles, providing support that conventional forces cannot match. All of these individuals become priority targets when flamers manifest, the demons seeking them out with single-minded determination that makes protecting psychers from these threats exceptionally difficult. The interaction between warp flame and psychic powers creates additional complications for psychers attempting to defend against flamer attacks. The flames carry properties that disrupt the controlled channeling of warp energy, interfering with the focus and discipline required for effective psychic technique. A psyker caught in warp flame finds their connection to the Immaterium destabilizing, their powers becoming erratic and dangerous, as the transformative energy corrupts the psychic conduits through which they work. Attempting to manifest powers while under warp flame assault risks catastrophic failure, the Psyker's soul tearing open to release uncontrolled warp energy that can prove as dangerous to allies as to enemies. The resilience of flamers to psychic attack compounds the threat they pose to Psykers. Where many demons prove vulnerable to attacks that strike directly at their warp energy composition, flamers possess inherent resistance born from their nature as living conduits of magical power. Psychic bolts and warp-based attacks wash over them with reduced effect, the energy absorbed and redirected through the demons' many mouths as additional warp flame. This creates a frustrating situation where the most effective weapons against demons prove least useful against these specific entities, forcing defenders to rely on conventional firepower that must overcome the flamer's demonic durability through sheer volume rather than exploiting supernatural vulnerabilities. The manifestation requirements for flamers follow the standard patterns that govern all Tzeentchian demons, requiring either breaches in reality or sufficient concentrations of appropriate emotional and psychic energy. The specific conditions that favor flamer manifestation involve locations where magic has been practiced extensively or where reality has been repeatedly stressed through psychic activity. Sorcerer's sanctums, astropathic relay stations, and navigator guildhouses all create ideal conditions for flamer emergence, the accumulated residue of countless psychic workings thinning the veil until these demons can slip through. The flamers that manifest in such locations prove particularly dangerous, as they appear in environments where psychers concentrate, allowing them to immediately begin their work of hunting those most capable of threatening demonic incursions. The mounted demons of Slaanesh represent a specialized evolution of the Dark Prince's lesser servants, creatures that combine the predatory grace of Daemonettes with the raw speed of demonic beasts bred for war. These cavalry units fulfill roles within Slaaneshi forces that standard Daemonettes cannot match, providing mobility and shock assault capabilities that transform how the god of excess wages war across real space. The marriage of rider and mount creates synergies that exceed the sum of their individual capabilities, producing combinations that exploit the weaknesses of slower, more conventional forces with devastating efficiency. Seekers of Slaanesh emerge when Daemonettes mount themselves upon steeds of Slaanesh, creating fast attack units that race across battlefields with supernatural velocity. The steeds themselves manifest as reptilian quadrupeds that blend characteristics of horses, lizards, and creatures that exist only in the warp's depths. Their bodies stretch long and lean, built for speed rather than strength, with powerful haunches that propel them forward in bursts of acceleration that leave conventional cavalry far behind. The skin appears smooth and scaled, displaying colors that range from pale pink to deep purple, often with patterns that shift and flow across the surface like oil on water. The head extends forward on a serpentine neck, ending in a skull that appears almost equine until the mouth opens to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth and a tongue that extends far longer than any natural animal could possess. This tongue represents the steed's primary weapon and most distinctive feature, a prehensile appendage that can extend several meters from the mouth to wrap around targets or lash at enemies like a whip. The tongue's surface glistens with a narcotic secretion that induces euphoria and paralysis in those it touches, the chemicals absorbing through skin contact to flood the victim's nervous system with sensations that override conscious thought. Soldiers struck by a steed's tongue report experiencing moments of intense pleasure that leave them helpless, their bodies refusing to respond to commands as the drug takes effect. This paralysis lasts only seconds, but in combat, those seconds prove fatal as the mounted Daemonette closes distance and strikes with her claws. The Daemonettes who ride these steeds display no visible means of control, no reins or saddles that would suggest conventional horsemanship. Instead, rider and mount share a psychic connection that allows them to move as a single entity, the Daemonettes will directing the steed through their bond to Slaanesh rather than through physical cues. This connection creates a level of coordination that mortal cavalry can never achieve, the mount responding to the rider's intent before conscious thought translates into action. A Seeker unit moves with fluid grace that makes their charges appear choreographed, each demon steed pair executing complex maneuvers in perfect synchronization with their packmates. The speed that Seekers achieve exceeds anything biological locomotion should allow, their steeds covering ground at rates that suggest warp-enhanced movement rather than simple running. They accelerate from standing starts to full velocity and heartbeats, their bodies blurring as they race forward. At full gallop, a Seeker pack becomes difficult to track with the naked eye, the individual demons merging into a wave of motion that flows across terrain like water running downhill. This velocity makes them exceptionally difficult targets for conventional weapons, as by the time a defender acquires a firing solution and pulls the trigger, the Seeker has already moved beyond the point where the shot will land. The tactical role of Seekers within Slaaneshi forces emphasizes rapid flanking maneuvers and the exploitation of gaps in enemy formations. These units operate independently of the main demonic advance, ranging ahead or to the sides where they can identify vulnerable targets and strike before defenders can reorient to meet the threat. Their speed allows them to bypass frontline defenses entirely, racing past fortified positions to attack supply lines, command posts, and artillery emplacements in the rear areas. The psychological impact of having enemy cavalry suddenly appear behind supposedly secure lines proves as valuable as the physical damage the Seekers inflict, as defenders must divide their attention between threats from multiple directions simultaneously. The devastating charge capabilities of Seeker packs stem from the combination of velocity, the steed's narcotic tongue, and the Daemonette rider's combat prowess. As the pack closes with its target, the steeds extend their tongues to lash at defenders, the paralytic secretions dropping soldiers before the actual impact occurs. Those who resist the drug's effects or avoid the tongue strikes face the momentum of the charge itself, the combined mass of demon and steed striking with force sufficient to bowl over armored infantry. The instant after impact, while defenders struggle to recover their footing, the Daemonettes strike with their claws, exploiting the confusion to inflict maximum casualties before the enemy can mount an effective response. The effectiveness of Seeker charges against Space Marine Rapid Response Forces has been documented across numerous engagements throughout the Imperium's history. The Adeptus Astartes typically deploy fast-moving elements to counter enemy breakthroughs and respond to developing threats, relying on their superior mobility and firepower to dominate the tactical battlefield. Seekers challenge this dominance through their capacity to match or exceed Space Marine movement speeds, while operating in terrain that vehicles cannot easily traverse. During the cleansing of Luxor Secundus, Seeker packs engaged White Scar's bike squadrons in running battles across the planet's desert wastes, the demons using their superior acceleration and the narcotic properties of their steeds' tongues to offset the Space Marines' heavier armor and more powerful weapons. The engagement patterns that emerged during Luxor Secundus demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of Seekers against power-armored opponents. The demons could achieve initial surprise and inflict casualties through their opening charges, but sustained combat against Space Marines proved costly. The Adeptus Astartes' enhanced physiology provided partial resistance to the paralytic toxins, and their armor absorbed claw strikes that would have killed unaugmented humans. The Seekers adapted by targeting individual Marines who separated from their squadrons, using their numbers to overwhelm isolated opponents before withdrawing when reinforcements approached. This hit-and-run approach frustrated the White Scar's attempts to bring their full firepower to bear, as the Seekers refused to commit to extended engagements where the Space Marines' advantages would tell. Imperial Guard armored columns present different challenges and opportunities for Seeker packs. The vehicles that form the backbone of Guard mechanized forces possess armor that Daemonette claws cannot penetrate and weapons that can destroy Seekers with single hits. However, these same vehicles depend on infantry support to protect them from close-range threats, and that supporting infantry becomes the Seeker's primary target. The demons race alongside moving columns, waiting for moments when the infantry screens thin or when terrain forces the vehicles into confined spaces where maneuver becomes difficult. At these moments, the Seekers strike, flowing through gaps between vehicles to fall upon the supporting troops. The massacre at Kasser Voren illustrated the threat that Seekers pose to armored formations operating without adequate infantry protection. A column of Leman Russ battle tanks advancing through a narrow valley found itself assaulted by 3 packs of Seekers that had positioned themselves on the high ground overlooking the route of march. The demons descended in a coordinated charge that struck the column's flanks simultaneously, their speed allowing them to close distance before the tanks could traverse their turrets to engage. The Seekers ignored the vehicles themselves, instead targeting the Chimera transports carrying the infantry squads meant to screen the armor. They ripped open the lighter vehicles' hatches and slaughtered the troops inside before the tankers fully comprehended the nature of the attack. By the time the Leman Russ crews realized their supporting infantry had been decimated, the Seekers had withdrawn, leaving the armor vulnerable to follow-up attacks by heavier Slaaneshi demons that the tanks could not fend off alone. The coordination between Seeker packs and other Slaaneshi demon types demonstrates the sophisticated tactical approach that the Dark Prince's forces employed despite their apparent focus on sensation and excess. Seekers function as the tip of the spear, their charges disrupting enemy formations and creating openings that slower demon units exploit. A typical assault begins with Seekers racing ahead to strike at key positions, their attacks forcing defenders to reorient and commit reserves to threatened sectors. As the enemy responds to the Seeker threat, Daemonette packs advance into positions that the defenders have weakened by shifting forces to counter the cavalry. The Seekers then disengage and reposition, preparing to strike at new targets while the Daemonettes press the main assault. Fiends of Slaanesh represent a different expression of the Dark Prince's cavalry doctrine, creatures that sacrifice the Seekers' pure speed for greater resilience and combat power. These multi-limbed monstrosities appear as nightmarish combinations of arachnid, feline, and demonic characteristics that create beings designed for sustained close combat rather than hit-and-run strikes. The body follows a roughly quadrupedal structure, with 4 powerful legs that propel the fiend forward in bounding leaps rather than the smooth gallop of steeds. Each leg terminates in a clawed foot capable of finding purchase on vertical surfaces, allowing fiends to climb walls and traverse terrain that would stop conventional cavalry. The torso rises from this quadrupedal base, a muscular mass covered in the same smooth skin that characterizes all Slaaneshi demons. The coloration tends toward deeper purples and blues compared to the paler hues of Daemonettes, and the surface displays a subtle iridescence that makes the fiend's exact position difficult to judge in changing light. From this torso extend multiple arms, anywhere from 4 to 6 depending on the individual demon, each limb ending in claws that combine the grasping capability of hands with the cutting power of blades. These arms move with disturbing independence, attacking different targets simultaneously or focusing their combined strength on single opponents as tactical circumstances dictate. The head sits atop a flexible neck that allows the fiend to strike in any direction without turning its body. The face presents a disturbing blend of features that suggest both beauty and horror, with high cheekbones and a delicate jaw structure, undermined by the mouth that splits too wide and the teeth that fill it. The eyes glow with the same soulless light that characterizes Daemonette gazes, tracking movement with predatory focus. A mane of hair like tendrils extends from the skull, these appendages writhing with independent motion and secreting the same narcotic substances that coat the steed's tongue. Contact with these tendrils induces the euphoric paralysis that marks all Slaaneshi close combat specialists, adding another vector for the demon's incapacitating effects. The scorpion-like tail that extends from the fiend's rear quarters represents its most distinctive and dangerous feature. This appendage stretches as long as the demon's body, segmented and flexible, ending in a barbed stinger that drips with concentrated toxins. The tail moves with whip-like speed, striking over the fiend's head to impale targets in front of the demon or lashing sideways to catch enemies attempting to flank. The venom delivered through the stinger combines paralytic and hallucinogenic properties, victims experiencing vivid sensory distortions, while their muscles refuse to respond to conscious control. Unlike the temporary paralysis induced by tongue or tendril contact, stinger venom produces effects that persist for hours, leaving victims helpless long after the fiend has moved on to other targets. The soporific musk that fiends exude represents a passive weapon that affects everyone in their vicinity regardless of whether the demon actively targets them. This scent emerges from glands distributed across the fiend's body, releasing a constant cloud of psychoactive compounds that saturate the air around the demon. The musk carries properties that bypass respiratory filters and sealed armor, the molecules small enough to penetrate gaps in protective equipment, while the psychic component of the effect reaches through physical barriers to touch the minds of nearby mortals directly. Soldiers who enter the area of effect report feeling their reactions slow, their thoughts becoming sluggish and difficult to focus, as though wading through thick syrup that impedes every mental process. The musk's effects intensify with proximity and duration of exposure, creating zones of influence around each fiend that defenders must avoid or suffer progressive debilitation. At the outer edges of the effect, perhaps 20 meters from the demon, soldiers experience mild symptoms, slight drowsiness, reduced alertness, a pleasant warmth that makes maintaining combat readiness difficult. Closer approach intensifies these effects, the drowsiness deepening into actual sleepiness, while the pleasant warmth becomes euphoric sensation that distracts from tactical necessities. Within a few meters of the fiend, the musk proves almost completely incapacitating, victims struggling to remain conscious while their bodies demand surrender to the sensations flooding their nervous systems. The tactical application of fiends emphasizes their role as shock assault beasts that break through defensive positions through a combination of physical power and chemical warfare. These demons advance at the head of Slaaneshi assaults, their musk preceding them to weaken defenders before contact occurs. By the time the fiends reach enemy lines, the soldiers manning those positions have already suffered significant degradation of their combat effectiveness, their slowed reactions and compromised judgment making them easy prey for the demon's multiple attacks. The fiends wade into defensive positions like living battering rams, their claws tearing through weakened resistance, while their tails strike down anyone who attempts to mount effective opposition. The resilience of fiends exceeds that of seekers significantly, their more robust construction allowing them to absorb damage that would destroy the lighter cavalry units. Where a seeker struck by heavy weapons fire typically collapses immediately, fiends continue their advance through storms of fire that would stop conventional assault troops. Their multiple limbs provide redundancy that keeps them mobile even after suffering crippling wounds. A fiend that loses one or two legs continues advancing on its remaining limbs, while the loss of several arms merely reduces rather than eliminates its offensive capability. This durability makes fiends ideal for assaults against fortified positions, where the approach requires crossing kill zones under concentrated fire. The complementary nature of seekers and fiends within Slaaneshi battle doctrine reflects the Dark Prince's understanding of combined arms warfare. The two demon types fulfill different tactical niches that together create capabilities neither possesses individually. Seekers provide speed and flexibility, striking at vulnerable targets across the battlefield and forcing enemies to disperse their forces to counter threats from multiple directions. Fiends deliver concentrated striking power, their durability and combat prowess allowing them to crack defensive positions that would blunt seeker charges. Coordinated employment of both types creates situations where defenders face impossible choices, concentrate forces to stop the fiends and leave flanks vulnerable to seeker attacks, or spread out to counter the seekers and lack the density to halt fiend breakthroughs. The engagement at Talorn's Edge during the Gothic War demonstrated this complementary relationship in action. Slaaneshi forces assaulting an Imperial Guard defensive line deployed seeker packs to harass the flanks, while fiends advanced directly against the fortified positions. The Guard commander initially committed reserves to counter the seeker threat, recognizing the danger of allowing enemy cavalry free rein in his rear areas. This weakened the main line at precisely the moment the fiends struck, the demons smashing through positions that lacked sufficient defenders to maintain cohesive resistance. When the commander attempted to recall his reserves to reinforce the breakthrough, the Seekers intensified their attacks, preventing the redeployment and ensuring the fiends completed their penetration unopposed. The psychological dimension of fighting both Seeker and Fiend forces simultaneously compounds the tactical challenges they present. The speed of Seekers creates a sense of being hunted, of facing enemies that can appear anywhere at any moment without warning. The inexorable advance of Fiends through their soporific musk generates feelings of helplessness, as defenders watch the demons approach while their own bodies betray them through chemically induced weakness. Together, these effects create an atmosphere of overwhelming threat that erodes unit cohesion and breaks morale through accumulated stress. Soldiers facing such combined assaults report feeling trapped between the need to watch for fast-moving threats from unexpected directions and the immediate danger of the advancing shock troops, whose very presence saps the strength required to resist them. The interaction between Seeker speed and Fiend durability creates tactical opportunities that neither demon type could exploit alone. Seekers can draw enemy fire and attention, using their mobility to survive the concentrated firepower, while Fiends advance under reduced pressure. Alternatively, Fiends can fix enemy forces in place through their assault, preventing tactical withdrawal, while Seekers maneuver to encircle and destroy the pinned units. The two types support each other's operations through their contrasting characteristics, the weakness of one covered by the strength of the other, in a relationship that multiplies their individual effectiveness. The notable engagements featuring these mounted demons span the Imperium's history from the Horus Heresy to the current age. During the Siege of Terra, Seeker packs harried the outer defensive lines, while larger demonic forces prepared their main assaults, the cavalry's speed allowing them to strike at multiple points along the vast perimeter faster than defenders could redeploy to counter each threat. The World Eaters encountered Fiends during their assault on the Emperor's palace, the demon's musk proving surprisingly effective against the Cornate Berserkers, whose rage-induced focus made them vulnerable to sensory manipulation that bypassed their conscious awareness. In the 41st millennium, both Seeker and Fiend forces have appeared during every major demonic incursion, their presence marking Slaaneshi involvement in conflicts across the galaxy. The 13th Black Crusade saw extensive employment of both demon types, with Seeker packs conducting deep reconnaissance for Chaos forces, while Fiends spearheaded assaults against fortified positions throughout the Cadian Gate. The fall of Cadia itself featured coordinated attacks by mixed Seeker and Fiend forces that exploited gaps in the planet's overstretched defenses, the demons racing through breaches created by Chaos Space Marine assaults to strike at strategic targets in the fortress world's interior. The effectiveness of these mounted demons against Space Marine forces stems from their capacity to exploit the few vulnerabilities that power armor and enhanced physiology leave exposed. Space Marines excel at sustained combat, where their superior equipment and training provide cumulative advantages, but both Seekers and Fiends operate according to principles that minimize extended engagements. Seekers strike and withdraw before the Space Marines can bring their full capabilities to bear, while Fiends overwhelm through concentrated assault that ends before the Adeptus Astartes can organize effective counterattacks. The chemical weapons both demon types employ prove partially effective, even against Space Marine physiology, the enhanced bodies of the Emperor's finest providing resistance rather than immunity to the paralytic and soporific effects. The threat that Seeker and Fiend forces pose to armored warfare extends beyond their capacity to destroy individual vehicles or kill supporting infantry. Their presence on a battlefield forces armored commanders to adopt defensive postures that sacrifice the mobility and offensive power that make armor effective. Columns must move slower to maintain tighter formations that Seekers cannot easily penetrate, reducing operational tempo and allowing enemy forces to dictate engagement timing. Armor must deploy closer to infantry support, limiting the range at which tanks can operate independently and reducing their ability to exploit breakthroughs. These constraints on armored operations prove as valuable to Slaaneshi forces as the actual casualties the demons inflict, as they deny the Imperium the full benefit of its mechanized assets. The methodology of demonic summoning represents one of the most dangerous practices that mortals can undertake, a deliberate invitation for entities of the warp to cross into real space under conditions that theoretically allow the summoner to control what emerges. The process requires extensive preparation, precise execution of ritual components, and an understanding of demonic hierarchies that few possess outside the most corrupt chaos cults and the most experienced chaos sorcerers. Every summoning represents a calculated risk where the potential rewards of demonic assistance must be weighed against the very real possibility of catastrophic failure that results in the summoner's death and the release of unbound demons into the surrounding area. The fundamental requirement for any summoning involves weakening the barrier between real space and the warp at a specific location. This thinning of the veil occurs through the expenditure of psychic energy, most commonly achieved through blood sacrifice. The life force released when a sentient being dies creates ripples in the immaterium that temporarily compromise the structural integrity of the dimensional boundary. The quantity of blood required varies based on the power of the demon being summoned and the current state of the veil at the summoning location. A single human sacrifice might suffice to call forth a handful of nurglings in a region where warp storms have already weakened reality, while summoning a cohort of bloodletters in an area of stable space might require dozens of deaths to generate sufficient disruption. The quality of sacrificial victims affects the ritual's efficiency and success probability. Psykers provide exponentially more energy per death than baseline humans, their souls burning brighter in the warp and creating larger disturbances when extinguished. A single Psyker sacrifice can replace dozens of normal humans in terms of the power released, making them highly valued targets for cult activities. Innocents, particularly children, carry a psychic resonance that certain rituals exploit, their deaths creating specific patterns in the warp that attract particular demon types. The Imperium's awareness of these factors drives much of its brutal response to discovered cults, as the knowledge that cultists specifically target innocents and psykers for their ceremonies justifies extreme measures to prevent such gatherings. The geometric configuration of the summoning space forms the second critical component. Specific patterns inscribed on floors, walls, or even living flesh create structures that channel warp energy along predetermined paths, guiding the demon's manifestation into a controlled space. These patterns vary based on which chaos god the summoner serves and what type of demon they wish to call forth. Cornate summoning circles emphasize 8 pointed stars and angular geometries that reflect the blood god's aesthetic, the lines typically drawn in the blood of the sacrifices. Tzeentchian rituals employ impossibly complex patterns that shift and change as the ceremony progresses, the geometry itself serving as a form of sorcerous calculation. Nurglite circles incorporate organic materials and deliberate imperfections that mirror decay's random nature, while Slaaneshi patterns pursue aesthetic perfection through curves and symmetries that please the Dark Prince. The inscribed symbols serve multiple functions beyond simple decoration. They create psychic boundaries that define where the demon can manifest and theoretically prevent it from attacking the summoner before the binding takes effect. They establish parameters for the demon's behavior, encoding instructions and limitations into the ritual structure itself. They also serve as focusing mechanisms that help the summoners will reach into the warp to call the specific entity or type of entity desired. A properly constructed summoning circle represents weeks or months of preparation, each line and symbol placed with precision that allows no room for error. The invocations spoken during the summoning provide the final element required to bridge dimensions. These words of power, spoken in the demonic tongue or in corrupted versions of human languages, carry psychic weight that resonates through the warp. The summoner's voice becomes a beacon that demons perceive across vast distances in the immaterium, announcing the opening of a pathway to real space and the terms under which entry is offered. The specific words used vary between traditions and cults, but all summoning invocations share certain characteristics. They name the demon or demon type being called, they establish the summoner's authority and right to command, and they specify the task or duration for which the demon's service is required. Chaos sorcerers, those mortals who have dedicated themselves to the study and practice of warp-based magic, represent the most capable summoners outside of actual demon princes and possessed individuals. These practitioners have spent years or decades learning the intricacies of demonic hierarchies, studying the true names of specific entities, and mastering the psychic disciplines required to impose their will upon creatures of the immaterium. A skilled chaos sorcerer can summon lesser demons with relative reliability, the ritual proceeding according to plan more often than not. They understand the nuances of binding, recognizing when a demon tests the limits of its constraints, and knowing how to reinforce those limitations before the entity breaks free. The true names of demons form a critical component of advanced summoning techniques. Every demon possesses a true name, a collection of sounds and concepts that define its essential nature within the warp. Knowledge of a demon's true name grants significant power over that entity, allowing the summoner to call that specific demon rather than simply requesting any available entity of a particular type. The demon finds itself compelled to respond when its true name is spoken correctly within the context of a proper summoning ritual, the metaphysical weight of its own identity pulling it toward the summoner's location. This compulsion does not guarantee obedience or prevent the demon from attacking if the binding fails, but it ensures the summoned entity is the one the summoner intended to call rather than some other demon that happened to be nearby in the warp. The acquisition of true names represents one of the most dangerous pursuits a chaos sorcerer can undertake. These names cannot be found in books or transmitted through conventional means, as speaking or writing a true name incorrectly can have unpredictable consequences. Instead, sorcerers must learn true names through direct psychic contact with demons, bargaining with entities of the warp for knowledge that those same entities guard jealously. A demon might trade its true name for services rendered, for sacrifices offered, or for the true names of other demons that the sorcerer has learned. This creates a currency of information within the demonic community, with true names serving as valuable commodities that can be exchanged for favors and power. The dangers inherent in summoning manifest most clearly when rituals fail or when summoners miscalculate the strength of their bindings. A summoning circle with a single misplaced line or an incorrectly drawn symbol creates a flaw that demons exploit immediately upon manifestation. The entity emerges into real space, recognizes the weakness in its constraints, and breaks free before the summoner can react. What follows typically involves the demon slaughtering everyone present, starting with the summoner, whose psychic signature marked them as the ritual's focus. Cult gatherings that end in this manner leave scenes of carnage that inquisitorial investigation teams recognize instantly. Bodies torn apart with demonic efficiency, evidence of ritual preparation, and the psychic residue that marks locations where the veil has been deliberately breached. Overconfidence represents another common cause of summoning disasters. A sorcerer who successfully summons and controls lesser demons might attempt to call forth more powerful entities, believing their skills sufficient for the increased challenge. The difference in power between a Bloodletter and a Herald of Corn, or between a Pink Horror and a Flamer of Tzeentch, proves greater than many summoners anticipate. The more powerful demon requires stronger bindings, more elaborate rituals, and greater force of will to control. A sorcerer who underestimates these requirements finds themselves facing an entity whose power exceeds their capacity to contain, the demon breaking free and exacting terrible revenge for the presumption of attempted binding. The imperial response to demonic manifestations relies heavily on the expertise of the Ordo Malleus, the branch of the Inquisition dedicated to combating demonic threats. These inquisitors and their retinues specialize in identifying demonic incursions, tracking cultist activities, and deploying the resources necessary to banish demons back to the warp. Their methods combine conventional military force with specialized knowledge of demonic weaknesses, psychic techniques developed specifically for combating warp entities, and access to sanctified weapons and equipment that prove more effective against demons than standard Imperial armaments. The Grey Knights stand as the Imperium's premier demon hunting force, a chapter of Space Marines created specifically to combat demonic threats. Every Grey Knight possesses psychic abilities in addition to their enhanced physical capabilities, their souls strengthened through rigorous training and psycho-conditioning that makes them resistant to demonic corruption. Their weapons carry sanctification that allows them to strike at the warp energy core of demonic manifestations, disrupting the patterns that hold these entities together in real space. A Grey Knight's force weapon, channeling the wielder's psychic might through a blade inscribed with wards and prayers, can banish a lesser demon with a single strike, the psychic shock dispersing the entity's manifestation and casting its essence back into the immaterium. The true names of demons prove as valuable in banishment as in summoning, though the applications differ significantly. An Inquisitor or Grey Knight who learns a demon's true name gains the ability to target that specific entity with banishment rituals of enhanced effectiveness. Speaking the true name while channeling psychic energy through appropriate focuses creates a resonance that destabilizes the demon's presence in real space, forcing it back through the veil regardless of how much sustaining energy it has accumulated. This technique proves particularly effective against demons that have established stable manifestations through possession or permanent warp rifts, situations where conventional banishment methods might fail due to the entity's strong anchor in reality. Sacred wards and protective symbols provide passive defense against demonic incursion, creating barriers that demons find difficult or impossible to cross. The Inquisition maintains extensive databases of verified ward patterns, geometric configurations, and runic inscriptions that have proven effective across thousands of years of demon fighting experience. These wards function through a combination of psychic resonance and faith-based metaphysics, the belief of those who inscribe and maintain them lending power to the symbols themselves. A properly constructed ward line can halt a demon's advance as effectively as a physical wall, the entity finding itself unable to cross the barrier despite possessing no physical form that should be affected by such obstacles. The effectiveness of wards varies based on the power of the demon attempting to cross them and the strength of faith backing the ward's creation. Lesser demons find even basic ward patterns difficult to penetrate, their relatively weak connection to real space making them vulnerable to any properly constructed barrier. Greater demons can sometimes force their way through ward lines through sheer power, though the effort costs them significant energy and leaves them weakened. The most powerful wards, those inscribed by saints or maintained through centuries of continuous prayer and faith, can repel even the mightiest demonic entities, creating zones of absolute protection that serve as sanctuaries during demonic incursions. Sanctioned Imperial Psychers contribute to demon fighting efforts through their capacity to perceive and interact with warp entities on their own terms. A Psycher can sense demonic presence before physical manifestation occurs, detecting the psychic disturbances that precede breaches in the veil. This early warning allows defenders to prepare for incursions, positioning forces, and establishing defensive measures before demons actually appear. During active combat, sanctioned psychers employ their powers to disrupt demonic manifestations directly, their psychic attacks striking at the warp energy patterns that sustain these entities in real space. The danger in such applications lies in the psycher's exposure to the warp, as channeling power to combat demons requires opening oneself to the same dimension from which those demons originate. The cyclical nature of demonic existence ensures that banishment represents only temporary victory rather than permanent destruction. When a demon's manifestation in real space suffers sufficient damage or loses the sustaining energy required to maintain coherent form, its essence snaps back into the warp like a severed cord under tension. The demon continues to exist within the immaterium, its consciousness intact though its capacity to affect real space has been temporarily severed. The time required before the demon can manifest again varies based on the severity of its banishment and the availability of opportunities to cross the veil. A demon dispersed by conventional weapons might reform within weeks or months, while one banished through the use of its true name by a Grey Knight might require decades or centuries before it can return. This cycle of manifestation, banishment, and eventual return creates a war of attrition that the Imperium cannot truly win through conventional means. Every demon destroyed returns eventually, its knowledge of previous encounters intact, and its hatred for those who banished it intensified. The same bloodletter might assault Imperial positions dozens of times across centuries, each manifestation bringing accumulated experience of how defenders operate and what tactics proved effective in previous engagements. The institutional memory of demonic forces exceeds anything mortal armies can achieve, as individual demons exist for millennia, while human soldiers live and die within spans of decades. The concept of true death for demons exists, but requires specialized weapons and techniques that permanently destroy the entity's pattern within the warp, rather than simply disrupting its manifestation in real space. The Emperor's sword, wielded by the Master of Mankind during the Horus Heresy, possessed this capability. It strikes not merely banishing demons, but obliterating them so completely that their essence ceased to exist even within the Immaterium. Certain weapons crafted by the Emperor and distributed to his most trusted servants during the Great Crusade carry similar properties, though many such artifacts have been lost across 10,000 years of warfare. The Grey Knights maintain a handful of weapons capable of inflicting true death, ancient blades and hammers whose origins trace back to the chapter's founding, and whose construction methods remain mysteries even to the chapter's greatest artificers. The strategic implications of lesser demon forces in the long war between Chaos and the Imperium shape how both sides approach conflicts across the 41st millennium. The Chaos forces enjoy significant advantages in terms of strategic flexibility and force regeneration. Demons require no supply lines, no logistics trains, no food or ammunition, or any of the countless resources that conventional armies consume. They manifest where summoned or where the veil weakens naturally, appearing in enemy rear areas as readily as on front lines. Their capacity to return after banishment means that Chaos forces can sustain campaigns indefinitely, throwing demon waves at Imperial defenses until those defenses eventually crack under accumulated strain. The Imperium counters these advantages through superior numbers, industrial capacity, and the coordination that centralized command allows. While individual demons might exist forever, the Imperium can produce soldiers and equipment faster than Chaos forces can destroy them, at least in aggregate across the galaxy. The Imperium's vast bureaucracy, for all its inefficiencies and corruption, enables the coordination of military efforts across thousands of worlds simultaneously. Forces defeated on one planet can be replaced with regiments from others, the losses absorbed into the Imperium's massive population base. The knowledge accumulated through 10,000 years of demon fighting provides tactical and strategic frameworks that, while imperfect, offer guidance for commanders facing demonic incursions. The role of lesser demons as expendable shock troops and terror weapons shapes how Chaos forces employ them in broader strategic contexts. Greater demons and demon princes command these lesser entities as tools to achieve specific objectives rather than as valued assets whose loss must be minimized. A Chaos Lord planning an assault might summon hundreds of bloodletters with the full expectation that none will survive, their purpose being to absorb defensive fire and create breaches that Chaos Space Marines can exploit. The calculus differs fundamentally from Imperial military doctrine, where every soldier's life carries value and commanders face consequences for excessive casualties. Chaos operates without such constraints, the infinite nature of demonic forces making attrition irrelevant from a strategic perspective. The psychological warfare value of lesser demons extends beyond individual battlefields to affect Imperial morale across entire sectors. Populations that have witnessed demonic incursions carry trauma that persists for generations. The knowledge that reality itself can tear open to release horrors from beyond, creating existential dread that conventional enemies never inspire. The Imperium's response to this psychological dimension involves extensive censorship and memory suppression, entire populations subjected to mind-wiping procedures after demonic incursions to prevent the spread of knowledge about Chaos. This necessity creates its own strategic burden, as the resources devoted to maintaining ignorance about demons might otherwise be employed in direct military applications. The contested nature of warp-tainted regions creates permanent battlegrounds where demonic and Imperial forces clash continuously without resolution. The Eye of Terror stands as the most prominent example, a vast region where the warp and real space overlap so completely that demons manifest freely without need for sustaining energy or ritual summoning. The Imperium maintains fortress worlds along the Eye's borders, permanent defensive installations that have held against demonic assault for 10,000 years. These worlds exist in states of perpetual warfare, their populations knowing nothing but combat against endless waves of demons that emerge from the Eye in numbers that would overwhelm any conventional defense. Only the constant reinforcement from across the Imperium and the fanatical determination of defenders who understand that retreat means the damnation of entire sectors keeps these fortress worlds functional. The 13th Black Crusade demonstrated the strategic coordination that Chaos forces can achieve when greater demons and demon princes align their efforts toward common objectives. Lesser demon forces deployed across hundreds of worlds simultaneously, their manifestations timed to coincide with Chaos Space Marine assaults and traitor fleet movements. The scale of demonic involvement exceeded anything the Imperium had faced since the Horus Heresy, with entire cohorts of Bloodletters, Plaguebearers, Daemonettes, and Horrors manifesting on key worlds throughout the Cadian Gate. The strategic pressure created by these simultaneous incursions forced the Imperium to divide its forces across multiple threatened sectors, preventing the concentration of strength that might have repelled the invasion decisively. The fall of Cadia itself illustrated both the power and limitations of demonic forces in strategic warfare. Lesser demons contributed significantly to overwhelming the fortress world's defenses, their endless waves exhausting defenders and creating breaches that traitor forces exploited. However, the final destruction of Cadia required conventional military force in the form of orbital bombardment and the physical impact of the Blackstone Fortress, demonstrating that demons alone could not achieve strategic objectives that required permanent physical changes to real space. The demons served as enablers and force multipliers, but the actual execution of Chaos strategic goals required the application of material power that only mortal forces could provide. The eternal nature of the conflict between Chaos and the Imperium ensures that lesser demons will continue playing their role as the infantry of the Dark Gods for as long as both sides persist. The Imperium cannot eliminate demons permanently, except through rare weapons and techniques that exist in insufficient numbers to matter strategically. Chaos cannot overwhelm the Imperium through demonic assault alone, as the material universe's laws ultimately favor organized mortal forces that can hold territory and exploit resources. This stalemate creates a grinding war of attrition where neither side can achieve decisive victory, only temporary advantages that shift back and forth across centuries and millennia. The knowledge that this war will never truly end shapes imperial doctrine at the highest levels. The Inquisition trains each generation of demon hunters, knowing that their students will face the same threats they fought, that the demons banished today will return tomorrow to threaten new generations. The Grey Knights maintain their vigil with the understanding that their chapter's mission will never be complete, that there will always be demons to fight and incursions to repel. This acceptance of eternal struggle defines the Imperium's approach to the demonic threat, a recognition that victory means survival rather than elimination of the enemy, that each day humanity endures represents success in a war that can never be won but must never be lost. The Lesser Demons of Chaos thus occupy a unique position in the galaxy's ongoing conflicts, simultaneously disposable and irreplaceable, weak individually, yet devastating in aggregate, temporary in each manifestation, yet permanent in their existence. They serve as the foot soldiers in a war that transcends conventional military conflict, representing not just enemy combatants but fundamental threats to reality itself. Against them stands the Imperium of Man, its vast armies and ancient institutions dedicated to holding back the tide of chaos one battle at a time, knowing that the war will continue long after every current defender has fallen, trusting that future generations will take up the burden and continue the fight. In this eternal struggle, the lesser demons remain constant, unchanging in their essential nature even as they cycle endlessly between the warp and real space, forever threatening, forever returning, forever the enemy that humanity must face until the stars themselves burn out and the universe reaches its final end.